and also direct the state of Alabama to protect them.
William versus Wallace, right?
I that was on Monday.
Okay.
I don't know about this turnaround Tuesday, but let me tell you what really happened.
There we go.
Tuesday.
Exactly.
Bright and early Tuesday, about I guess between 9 and 10 o'clock, I get a phone call, and it was Judge Johnson's law clerk on the phone. And he told me, he said, Mr. Gray, I'm Judge Johnson's law clerk, and he want to have a conference with you and have set it for 10 o'clock. I said, yes, sir. Well, not all lawyers know that when you file a lawsuit, and in less than 24 hours, you're being told to meet the judge, you're in trouble. I knew I was in trouble, but I didn't know how serious it was. I went, I was there by myself, talked to the judge. Nobody was in that office but the two of us. And those of you who knew Judge Johnson, you know, he used to, when he started talking, he looked over the top of his glasses and he says, lawyer, you filed a suit in this court saying that your clients have a right to march from Selma to Montgomery, and you want the state of Alabama to protect them. And he said, I've reviewed that complaint. And if you prove the allegations in your complaint, the court's going to grant the relief you asked for. You couldn't ask for anything more than that. He says, however, I've heard, and usually courts don't rely on hearsay evidence, but he said, I heard that your clients, so the clients you represent in this class action, intend to go ahead and march from Selma to Montgomery any day. He says the court has on its own, now it says, one, the court's going to deny your motion for a temporary injunction. Two, the court is setting a hearing for your preliminary injunction on Thursday. This is just 2 days from now. And he says the court on its own has entered a temporary injunction enjoining your clients not to march from Selma to Montgomery until the court has entered this order. And I tried to explain, now I've been representing Dr. King and these groups for about 10 years about the movement and all. He says, Mr. Gray, you're an officer of the court, control your clients. I got up, got somebody to go with me, went to Selma, found Dr. King had come. He wasn't there the day before, but you got all these thousands of people who are there now. And I said, I just want to talk to Dr. King. And I didn't call him doctor. He called me Fred, and I called him Martin. I told him what has taken place, and I said, you know, we've been in this business now for 10 years. This is the greatest opportunity we have, in my opinion, to get our people registered to vote all over the state, not just in Alabama, and be able to help to solve these problems. And he set this hearing for 2 days from now. I said, I don't have time to see anybody else or talk to anybody else. I just want your commitment to me that, one, you won't lead them across that bridge. Now, how you do it, I don't need to know. I need to go and work on this case that starts on Thursday. We shook hands, and he says, Fred, I will not take them across. Now, I don't think, and you read, you know, you got a lot of these things when they said turn around Tuesday. It wasn't turn around Tuesday because I talked to Dr. King on Tuesday. It was turn around Wednesday. But what happened was that on Wednesday, the state troopers was on one side of the bridge, and they came up, stayed a little while. Dr. King and the others on the other side of the bridge, they came up, After the state troopers left, then Dr. King and his group had a prayer, and then what did they do? They ended up turning around and went back to the church. We had a hearing on Thursday. It lasted for 4 or 5 days. The court ruled in favor of our complaint. And then the day after the judge had to rule in the case, Judge Johnson had ruled on our case for us, he ended up then calling another meeting. But this time, he didn't just call Fred Gray. He called in all the people. And he had also designated, as we had asked him to do in some of those school cases in 65, designate the government as a party plaintiff in this case because this really involves it. And he had done that. And of course, we then had our hearing, and they ended up, the court said to us that I understand, and they have not done it yet, that Alabama plans to appeal. And he said to the lawyers, if you plan to appeal, the appeal must be filed immediately. And because I have arranged a special session of the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans this evening at 6 o'clock. And he says, there's a plane that'll leave here that'll get you to New Orleans in time for that. And one of the lawyers for the state says, did you make reservations for us? He said, no, I didn't make reservations, but they have space. And he excused us. The court designated John Doe represented the government. So we were on the same side. We got together and talked, and the state lawyers was able to go down to New Orleans. Well, then what happened was the flight that's supposed to have come to Montgomery was late, so it would not get us there by 6. So John Doe was representing the government, said, I'm going to go over here, and he went. He didn't say, tell me what I was going to do. He went over, rented a plane, and invited me to go on down since we were on the same side.
Good everything, everybody. Hello, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Episode 291.
91. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey, what's going on this beautiful day?
Yeah, who's this amazing human being?
Well, as we know from having talked about him back in March at length, and before that, the year before that, when he came here to DC to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Joe Biden. It was interesting. I did not know before this week that the ask for consideration for a Presidential Medal of Freedom, actually the nomination, I suppose. I'm not sure how those processes work, but I didn't know that that had been made during the first term of Barack Obama. Well, another missed opportunity. But Joe Biden awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Reverend Fred David Gray. That is Fred Gray, still swinging with both fists at 94. He and his beautiful wife, Carol, got a chance to spend a couple of days with them this week out in Cleveland, her hometown, actually, and with Mr. Gray. Okay, I say Reverend Gray because he is an ordained minister in the Church of Christ, very deeply spiritual man. But that's him talking with the good brother Robert White, Dr. Robert White, who is a professor at Alabama State University, also a minister, Montgomery City of Refuge Church. Shout out to Montgomery City of Refuge. Saw him in last March at the Fred Gray Institute's inaugural symposium, which we talked about, of course, at that time. But that's Fred Gray and David White at the Frank Johnson Courthouse in Montgomery, the cradle of Confederacy, as they often say there. That's them. That is actually on I think the 15th of this past
Wow.
January. That is Martin Luther King's birthday holiday celebration day. So they are sitting there going through Fred Gray's two-fisted attempt to kill everything segregated, which he continues to do to this day. So that's him. That's him a few months ago, and he looked just like that right now. I just saw him yesterday. So
Wow.
yeah,
Do you think the government that Fred Gray, Thurgood Marshall, Pauli Murray, all Spotswood Robinson, that they were fighting against is any way similar to this regime that we're under?
it's a great question. Yeah, absolutely, it's the same regime, and no, at the same time, the people that we face now are much more. We think about that in the social structure category of our African Studies framework. The people we face now are, in terms of the federal government right now, the executive branch, several orders of magnitudes more stupid. They are, and I'll use this word because at this point it really doesn't behoove us to do anything except call a thing a thing. They are evil. George Wallace was a segregationist. He and Frank Johnson, Judge Johnson, went to law school together, University of Alabama, actually, and they were great friends. They disagreed, and near the end of his life, George Wallace said, "I was wrong on segregation, and Frank Johnson was right." So there's this kind of grounding. Doubt very seriously that anyone at the top levels of the executive branch of the federal government, at least in terms of Donald Trump, has read the Bible. This is very different, I think, than the Bible Belt Christians. Now I know Russell Vogt has read it and read it very closely because he is a religious zealot. He's particularly convicted with that Old Testament.
There's a difference between reading something and then reading for comprehension or reading for understanding or reading for, especially as it relates to spiritual or religious text, reading to actually gain enlightenment. I don't think they're doing that. And I also think the civility, even as he talks about Lyndon Johnson talking to him over, he still addressed him like a human being. Lawyer. I mean, lawyers kind of little bit not as respectful, but it wasn't the way these people comport themselves. It's very,
Well, he called everybody lawyer. That's the thing. It was a very flat. No, that title was for everybody, black, white, or polka dot. So in that way, it is
right, that's what I'm
the
saying.
ultimate expression of yeah.
There's a level of humanity, understanding, and exchange that I don't think exists today. I think there is a lack of civility that goes beyond like just poor home training. There's something very
Yeah, well, they're
there's
desperate now.
no decorum. There's no decorum. There's no
No. Well, I think that Marimba Ani would call it the rhetorical ethic anyway. She would say that even if you had the height of decorum, it wouldn't comport with your behavior. That's what makes people like Frank Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, Eisenhower, at least slightly different in this regard. There was a belief in something. And then we sort of, of course, have to consider that this is the 1950s and 60s when the United States is still expanding as a global power. The United States really, I mean, people talk about the American century, but it's not 1900 to 2000. It's not the late 19th century to now. It's really kind of like 1945 to the end of maybe I would put it almost to 2001 when the World Trade Center went down. I think that's the symbolic symbol for everybody can be touched. After World War II, the United States is kind of like the power that emerged. So by the time you get to the mid 50s, they're still expanding. The Korean War, because you still got old Europe kind of convulsing. The Russian Soviet Union is still the Soviet Union. China is emerging. Nixon goes to China in the early 70s. The United States is still expanding. And so it can afford to have that kind of pretension. And part of the civil rights movement, as we know, okay, everybody from Carol Anderson to Gerald Horne have written about this and talked about this. Part of the advances of the so-called civil rights movement is the United States telling the rest of the world, which is overwhelmingly non-white, that they can be trusted to lead the world. because when they're coming into Africa and they're coming into Caribbean and they're trying to get with China and they're saying, yeah, we now going to assume the role. They're pushing back like, yeah, but y'all racist as hell. And Kwame Nkrumah and Lumumba and them, even Mandela and them, nah, y'all can't be trusted. We're going to talk with the Soviets. We're going to talk with the Chinese because y'all be treating people who look like us. And then many of those people went to school in the United States. When they come to Nkrumah, like, let us help you. Say, hell no, I went to Lincoln, man. Are you kidding me? I lived in New York. I know what y'all do. And so that's Howard French, right?
I just talked to them this week, right? Because
Excellent.
Italy's collapsing, or not collapsing. Italy's, the
No.
people
Yeah.
are saying, we're not having it. France, France is like, the French people are like, yeah, nah, we're not doing this. We will shut this thing down. We will, you let us eat cake if you want to. So I was asking Howard French, like, walk us through the colonialism and how Africa's response to France now is different or the same. And he brought up Nkrumah, and I was thinking about Nkrumah because I was also talking with Daniel Black on Monday about, this love of blackness. I played a couple of clips from these melanated people saying they miss us. And it's quite different. And a woman that lived in Canada was like, I tried to move to a black area in Calgary, and they were Nigerians, and it was different. And then I think about Nkrumah, who spent a lot of time here in the United States, and there's a different tone and tenor to liberation and humanity that I think he brought back to Ghana. I don't know if he just stayed there, if he could have been who he was without being here and having the community.
He couldn't.
Right. Then Howard said, France knew that they couldn't take down what was going on with Nkrumah, because then he was binding together with Guinea, and that's a French speaking. They're French and English coming together. And I said, well, y'all done came together. French, but you're Portugal, all y'all got in a room and came together from different places with different tongues. Why can't Africa? And he said, so they got the guy from Ivory Coast.
Felix a nasty little servant of empire.
Correct.
Yes.
But
yes.
it always comes from inside the house, right? So
no question.
I said, was it worth his soul? He said, well, he died one of the richest men in Africa. So I said, man, so that guy gave up the potential to have complete domination over your continent for a few pieces of gold for yourself.
Yeah, they can always find a Negro to do that. Where's you heard from Congressman Donalds yet recently? Myron Donalds?
Oh yeah, no. Jasmine Crockett lifted his wig yesterday. I think.
Yikes! Oh, I have to check that out because I mean, other than somebody name checking him, I have
name checked them and aired them out.
Yeah.
But yeah, by and large, yeah. Tim Scott.
Where's Tim?
I don't know. I
That's
guess
Tiny Tim.
In Wedded Bliss, maybe.
Ooh, he sent something. He wedded too. But no, but to the point you're raising, when you look at Cote d'Ivoire, when you look at the Central African Republic, when they kidnapped Aristide, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and took him out of Haiti, they dumped him in the CAR for a minute, and then Maxine Waters and Randall Robson and them, hey man, what are you? So they sent him to South Africa ultimately. But there's always somebody willing to do the bidding. And we got a lot of those Negroes. Or there were people willing to do the bidding in the 50s when Fred Gray and them are swinging the courts.
I was going to ask, like, so the the battle that we fight, it's like, okay, it's not just, you think it's enough. All right. You say we're dragged, so we're going to build community. Okay. So Rosewood, Greenwood, Wilmington, Eatonville, we're going to go. You ain't got to come here. Matter of fact, stay where you are. We're minding our business. We're not bothering you. And then here you come. And then
you have to come. You can't. You have no choice but to come. Because if you let it get too big, you can't stop it.
So what I'm saying is this is way more complex than just leave us alone, because the light bulb came on. All of this talk about black on black crime, and you coming into Chicago and you coming into places you don't even live. You don't ever have to experience the crime in Chicago, ever. Y'all self-segregate. 75% of you don't have anybody black in your neighborhood, community, church, schools, no place. There are whole states that are like 99% you, Utah, North and South Dakota, Montana, New Hampshire. You don't have to be around us at all. So why are you concerned about what if we are killing each other? Isn't that what you want? 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 And if it isn't what you want, you're not really concerned about our lives. So if we are so violent towards each other and violent in our own neighborhoods that you're never in, why does it matter to you? So then
Well, I mean, we know they're proxies. We know they're
the
proxies for a
right
larger conversation.
though
Yeah.
is
Chicago's a metaphor
for what, Dr. Carr?
for the country, for whiteness. Chicago, New York, LA, Memphis, those are metaphors. They could give a damn about the real estate. In fact, I'm just thinking as you were talking, this is in today's New York Times, this morning's New York Times. Shout out to our friend and brother Ras Baraka. A federal judge said on Thursday that she was prepared to release Newark from the U.S. Justice Department's decade-long oversight of its police department, a step that will mark the end of a court-imposed overhaul of an agency that was for years both feared and reviled. Why? Because the crime numbers in Newark have plummeted so low that the feds are like, look, not the feds, because I'm sure that Trump would love to get on TV. We got to go to Newark. Nah, the judge is like, yo, man, the crime has dropped. You know what? We're going to let y'all out of this. Shout out. Go ahead, Ras. I see you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, in other words, so yeah, it's a metaphor. It ain't what's going on in the city. This is the N word, which of course Donald Trump says there too. And quite frankly, Donald Trump could call me the N word that we think of first all day long. I would prefer he call me that rather than because now I know, you should say it with your little tiny bird chest, man. Say it because it don't mean nothing to me. The one I would be a little bit concerned about is the one that he was talking to them generals and admirals about. That's the N word that could end the conversation we're having and everybody listening immediately. That's the nuclear. I don't give a damn about that other one. Shit,
Right.
I'm already speaking English. What else can you do to me, man? So the word don't mean nothing to me. That's your nightmare. But that other N word, but no, Newark, Chicago, LA, New York, that's like screaming the N word. They're metaphors for something else. You know what I'm saying? And they ain't going to the South Side of Chicago. We know that. Them little hillbillies they recruiting to make $150,000 a year, put a little handkerchief over their face. They're not busting up on South Cottage. They're not going on State Street. They are not coming out to where's our brother Theaster Gates place right across near the Mosque Mariana, South Shore Drive. They ain't coming out there. I mean, they can if they want. They're not doing it. It's metaphors. Just
So,
like they ain't go to Southeast DC.
so we have to stop taking the bait too, because it's like
Yes.
we're
Come
defending
on now.
something that is already
Teach.
insane on its face, right? Y'all don't care about violence in the Black community. You don't care how violent Black people are, because if we are violent towards each other, which every group is violent towards, you're gonna commit crime where you live, around the people that you're around, it's not affecting you. So the lie is right there in the accusation. So I think we need to keep doing that. And you ask a question, or can America continue?
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask, should it?
Well, I thought about that's interesting. You say that. I, was thinking about that. Can it continue? Should it continue? I don't think it should continue. And then you might agree, or we had that conversation. The reason I thought maybe can was better was because we may very well be beyond the point where should America continue? The answering yes to that question could stop what's going to happen. In other words, we may actually be at the point where it's not up to the United States anymore. And that's why I say, can it continue? I mean, we say, yeah, it should continue. Too late. The Brazilians have made the deal with the Canadians, and the Mexicans are coming out from under your thumb too. And China has expanded even more, and the EU is making deals now for them. And you're going to have to eat those soybeans, my friend. In other words, you don't have a choice. Can it continue? Sure.
I would think it should, because should puts the onus on us to think about it, right?
Oh,
Because
I see. Sure.
should gives us a responsibility to do something.
Mm.
The answer, right?
Oh, I see. I see.
And coming to the answer, it's like, I don't think it should, and here's what needs to happen. Because if you're not contemplating the end of a thing, whether it's your life, you know, a lot of things. So I think a lot of people have not contemplated the end of a job, and then it happens, and then you're not prepared for it, right?
Uh-huh.
A lot of us don't contemplate not being here. We avoid, you know, and as you say, we're all gonna have that day. But if you contemplate it and do your will and take care of your estate and make sure that when you are at the end, that there's provisions to be taken care of, so the burden's not on your face. If you do that, then it's a lot less painful because it's gonna happen for all of us. We don't know when, but in the preparation. So should it happen, I say yes. Okay, what does that mean for my existence here? If I'm going to stay, if I'm going to go, you know, like it puts the onus on us to have to think about preparation for that time. And what does that even look like? Like, let's start asking that question. America not continuing. We're still going to be on this landmass breathing. Will there be government or will it be states, individual sections and groupings? Like, what does that look like? And how do we manifest that or usher it in?
It's a good observation. I think that's a solid observation. In fact, we should probably just add that to this week so we can say, can America continue? And then put, should it? Just put it right there. Because I think, you know, for the and I like one of the brothers called in this week on the radio and called Pete Hegseth a DEI peacock. I like that. I like Runt Rooster too, but I like DEI peacock. So, you know, at this point, calling for open violence, for murder in front of 800 plus generals and admirals. You know, I welcome it. I absolutely encourage it because it forces the mask off. We have been subjects to violence to the first person put their hands on us, and that has been unyielding. Now you force the people in that room. I start to say the men because you know, looking at that array and you know, picking out them few little non-white dots and mostly almost overwhelmingly men. It forces them to make a choice. You know, the idea that the military will not intervene is a minority experience in the last certainly several centuries of world history. The idea that the military won't step in. If this were Ghana with Jerry John Rawlings twice, if this were Idi Amin in Uganda, if this were Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, or for that matter, Ibrahim Traore, there will be calls for the military to intervene. The difference between the United States and those other countries that I mentioned is nothing, absolutely nothing. All of them have this in common. They are populated by human beings. And they also have this in common. The general apparatus that frames the social structure in those countries, if not completely indistinguishable, is perhaps a little, let's say, um, a little. The distinction is a distinction without a major difference. What's wrong with these?
All right. Now you're muted.
I
Now I
am.
can.
Now,
Okay.
let's.
There we go. Perfect. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yes, ma'am. Let me go and put the audio actually on the Instalink. Yeah, that
Actually, that
external.
sounds good. That sounds good.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, the it's a distinction without a major difference in the sense that, you know, we think, well, the United States military is apolitical. Yeah, in theory. We know, of course, that everybody has a political opinion. So, and it was interesting hearing the governor of Maryland, who is a veteran, a real veteran, and who said that as the commander of the Maryland National Guard in his role as governor, he has a sworn duty not to not to issue an illegal order. And he says the women and men, the people who wear the uniform of the Maryland National Guard, and any National Guard for that matter, but he's talking about Maryland because he's in charge of the Maryland National Guard, they have an expectation of me that I will not give them an unlawful command. But they also have a sworn duty not to obey an unlawful command. And what we heard the Runt Rooster, the DEI peacock, do this week as he strutted back and forth on the stage there in Virginia at Quantico. And I loved one of the, you know, these people have these humorous quips, and they said, yeah, two men stood before 800 plus fighters. And these two men had on more makeup than both of their wives combined. And they wanted to talk about masculinity. Now, we know Prince wore makeup, and everybody's, I wore makeup myself. I was a theater person. But these two, But Governor Moore said, soldiers have sailors have Marines have they have a sworn duty not to obey an unlawful order. He's not hiding saying that. He's saying that with his full chest, and he has a chest to say it from. These two little balsa wood-chested humans, I'm not going to gender them. I respect them enough not to attribute to them the same type of maleness that I would attribute to my father. But they and other men, they, are preparing, and they ranted on what would be, if they translated that into military commands, unlawful orders. And those generals and those admirals know that. They know the military code of justice. They know policy and procedure, and they sat there going either way, kind of stone-faced. Why? Because that day hasn't come yet, but it probably will come to that, and they will be getting these unlawful orders. And they have sworn duty not to obey them. But we don't know what happens next. And so we wanted to start this morning with Brother Gray, who is in his mid-90s, continuing to fight. And, much love and respect to the people who put together this latest convening of the Fred Gray Institute for Human and Civil Rights. It was a rich conversation, and I won't go through it in detail. It was a small, intimate group of folks. We got a chance to go to where Fred Gray went to law school. He went to Alabama State University for undergraduate. And they talked about that. I encourage everybody to look at this January 15th, 2025 conversation there between Fred Gray and Dr. Robert White from Alabama State, because it's just, not only is it inspirational, it's very instructive, but as I said, shout out to Fred and Carol Gray, and shout out to David Fleer, who is one of the senior administrators at the Fred Gray Institute in Tuskegee in the Alabama, the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights entity there, that came as a direct result of Fred Gray's lawsuit on behalf of the victims of the Tuskegee experiment. And everyone else who participated, my friends and colleagues, my old law school classmate, well, he was a couple years ahead of me, my roommate, actually, gave me a place to stay my second year of law school. Robert Solomon, who is a senior administrator at Case Western Reserve, and condolences to him on the passing of his mother-in-law, Shane. My friend and colleague, Alicia Bell Hardaway, is doing some remarkable work around criminal justice, criminal injustice, trying to stop it there. And good brother Brian Fair, who's also a law professor, not at Case Western, as in this is the case with Professors Bell, Hardaway, and Solomon, but he's at the University of Alabama. These three Africans doing just some incredible intellectual work. It's always good to be in community with folks who are thinking and acting as not only thinkers, but translating that into other ways to intervene in the world. And when the conversation gets like that, you can kind of dispatch with the kind of threshold stuff. It takes you a minute to move from what we used to doing, which is, when you're in teacher mode, you're constantly listening and bringing along. And then, but when you can dispatch with that and move into another space, it's just a reminder of the importance of that kind of work. And for a man like Fred Gray, who is in his mid-90s, his mind is so sharp and quick-witted. People like that tend to be funny as hell. So the older you get, the funnier you get. No filters. Not that I don't think he ever had a filter, but it was really remarkable to listen and ask questions and then be asked questions and then move beyond, and the action steps is very important. But in that process, it was a very, very sharp reminder for me that this non-commitment I have to anything is going to side with evil. Something I think we all share, frankly. You commingle that with an absolute commitment to our common humanity, into the broader concept of being in the world, Africana ways of knowing, would make the United States of America as it's presently constituted not only unsustainable in a kind of objective glance at what's going on in the world and what's going on here in this country, but unsustainable as a moral stance. Nah, we're good. So, I wanted to quote from a text that I keep around on Judge Frank Johnson. This was a white man, as I said, Frank Johnson, and y'all can look him up for yourself. But Frank Johnson's a very interesting figure. Brown versus Board of Education decided in 1954, May 1954. Fred Gray comes out of law school shortly thereafter, a few months after that. He then has options. He can, after passing the bar, he could practice law in Ohio. He could practice law in Alabama. And as he reminds, if you watch this conversation from January, or as he reminded us this week, sitting there talking with him, he said, it was something that I hadn't told anybody I was going to do. But while I was studying in law school and when I was preparing for the bar that summer, I was studying the general principles in the law, federal law, Ohio law, because I was in Ohio, the case Western Reserve. But I didn't tell anybody I was also looking at what the Alabama law said, because I was going to sit for both bars. And nobody knew that but me. So I took both bars. I passed both bars. And I was encouraged to stay in Ohio and make a career there. He said, but I had taken an oath to myself, and I ain't told no, I didn't. He said, I held that for 50 years. He says that to my man, Dr. White, in this interview that you saw the beginning of the clip of. He says, I took an oath that I didn't tell anybody for 50 years when I had said to myself. He said, I'm going back to Alabama and I'm going to destroy everything segregated I can find. He said, I'm still on that path. So, but in a country, in a society, in a community where you take that kind of stance, you got to find people who are going to take that stand with you. And while Fred Gray was born in Tuskegee, Frank Johnson was born in Alabama. This is a white man born in 1918. Memory serves me correctly. Which makes him, roughly speaking, about just a little over a decade older. He made transition in 1999, Judge Frank Menace Johnson did, but Frank Johnson was raised in a pure white community, white schools, white everything. I think his junior or senior year in high school, he goes to Mississippi to one of these boarding schools, comes back, University of Alabama, meets his wife, University of Alabama Law School, and then his family were Republicans, which of course in the South you were allowed to be because the Democratic Party ran the South. And so Republicans going back a couple of generations, which means you're going back into that 19th century, which means you're going back into the time when Black people were Republicans, which means when you read W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction, or anybody writing about the era, Black people were Republicans, because of course we're not talking about the current white nationalist nativist party. It says Republican, and in many ways some of its economic principles track with the Republican Party, but politically this is the inversion. The Republicans of today are the Democrats of that period. So if you are a Republican and you want to lean on this completely and thoroughly debased and debunked ahistorical construct of the current Republican Party as the extension of the Republican Party from the 1850s forward, then you are either uninformed or a purebred liar. Those are only two choices. So, but Johnson's family was Republicans, which means they were on the side of the more progressive approach. And Johnson was a Republican, Judge Johnson, who becomes Judge Johnson. And when he is appointed to the federal bench at age 37 years old for the federal Middle District of Alabama by Dwight Eisenhower. This is 1955 or 56, maybe late 55. So after Brown too. Johnson, at 37 years old, becomes this young judge on the federal bench, and he is the judge. He is the judge in December of that year that has to grapple with, well, not December, actually. This is December is when Rosa Parks is thrown off that bus and for violating the city ordinance.
and Fred Gray becomes her lawyer, because there ain't two black lawyers in the state of Alabama. Fred Gray's one. And they come for him, and he said, man, I just graduated from law school. What am I? I'm just practicing law in Alabama. Yeah, well, you better get your weight up. And so that starts Fred Gray's journey, which continues to this day. Can you imagine that? 55 to 2025 is 70 years of war. Woo. And just as cool as the other side of the pillow, as old folks used to say, this man is just cool as a cucumber, still doing his work, still practicing law. So, Judge Johnson hears the case that comes in the wake of Rosa Parks' arrest and the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, because it is Fred Gray standing before Frank Menace Johnson that represents Aurelia Browder, who was one of the first four plaintiffs, which includes, by the way, Claudette Colvin, who was arrested, of course, before Rosa Parks, and two other plaintiffs in the case of Miss Colvin, young Miss Colvin, and her friends who were also plaintiffs. Their parents had to sign for them. And this is the case Browder versus Gale. And when that case was filed in Judge Johnson's court, he called for a special 3-judge district court to consider the constitutional challenge. And he told the presiding judge at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, because that was where Alabama was covered by the Fifth Circuit at that time. Later it became part of the 11th Circuit when they made up another one. But he told the judges at the Fifth Circuit, the law is clear. It doesn't tolerate discrimination on the basis of race. And when it got to the Supreme Court, Johnson's ruling was upheld by the Fifth Circuit, was upheld by the Supreme Court. Contrast that to today. I'm not sure that it would be upheld by the people say the Fifth Circuit is one of, if not the most conservative courts in the country. I would amend that and say, yes, if you want to continue to uphold the increasingly fragile word conservative to label something that isn't conservative, unless you're talking about conserving white power. I'm increasingly not using the word conservative because it papers over the reality. These are white nativists, white nationalists, and don't get confused by the color of some of their skin, as we've established with Hope Bonnier in Cote d'Ivoire, as we've established with Congressman Donalds out of Florida, or Tim Scott out of South Carolina, skin color, or Clarence Thomas at Pinpoint, Georgia, or really Savannah, Pinpoint, Gullah Geechee territory. Skin color doesn't matter when you have sworn a fealty to white nativism and white nationalism. These are white nationalists, ideologically white nationalists. So you can call them conservative if you want, but that can obscure the reality. And we've got to get to the point where we can confront these things. Can America continue? Should it continue? Well, in order to make those questions real and make them stand up and make some choices, we need to be able to have some type of common language that doesn't obscure the point. So I don't know that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, now a white nativist majority court, or the Supreme Court of the United States, a white nativist court, majority court, would have upheld Browder versus Gale today. It doesn't mean you quit the fight. It just means that you begin to approach how you fight maybe a little slightly differently. And of course, Browder versus Gale is that first case that Judge Johnson, first major case he decides, and for 24 years, he's the presiding judge in that middle district. Up to and including a case which continues to this day. I think there are maybe a couple of dozen school districts in the state of Alabama that are still subject to a consent decree. In the case of Lee versus Macon County. Macon County is where Tuskegee is located, Fred Gray's hometown, and it was Tuskegee High School, and they were trying to integrate, and ultimately that leads to Frank Johnson saying the whole state of Alabama is running a dual education format that must be dismantled because it's unconstitutional. They are still under the consent decree. Professor Bill Hardaway was asking the other day, saying, yeah, she was going through a little bit of Lee versus Macon County. And she said, she looked at Brother Gray and was like, Baba Gray, and said, hey, it's still active, right? I don't want to misspeak. He said, yeah. Oh, yeah. So there are still school districts in this country that are under desegregation mandates, as you know. I mean, there are people who know this, and maybe there's some who don't, particularly if you're a young person. And again, just so gratified to continue to meet people, including young people who are here with us week after week, because this is a classroom. And, we talk about our science and technology conceptual category, How did or do African people use science and technology to advance our collective interests? How have we done it? How do we do it now? How might we do it in the future? We understand that these platforms, as we call them now, that's the common parlance, are essential. The concept of formal brick and mortar education is still very important, but let's be very clear, that's been jailbroken. In fact, there was an article, and I'll continue in a minute, but I was reading an article, and I think it was today's Financial Times, the Financial Times weekend, on the stock, the purchase. In fact, if I can find it quickly, I want to quote from it, because I mean, it's nothing we don't know, but it gives us a sense of that's KKR. Look at that. Yeah, companies and markets section. CVC to buy 20% stake in Global Schools Group, ISP. Some of y'all know about ISP. Private equity group CVC has struck a deal to buy into an international schools group at a 7 billion euro valuation, more than triple what it was worth 4 years ago. The buyout firm is taking a 20% stake in International Schools Partnership, alongside majority owner Partners Group of Switzerland, in the latest in a string of billion-dollar deals for private education companies. The unhinged, soon-to-be former state superintendent of schools, Ryan Walters in Oklahoma, he of the wanting to put a chapter of Turning Point USA in every public high school in Oklahoma, his last major flame-throwing act before he decided that he would resign as state superintendent and to take a private position in this anti-union formation that is, I'm sure, pumped up by all the millionaires and billionaires necessary. So, Prof, when you asked at the beginning a moment ago whether or not, the America of then was the America now, the United States of then was the United States of now, the United States of the Selma Montgomery March is the same as the United States is now. And I said, yeah, and no, but yeah. The no part is because of the pushback, of course, as we know, largely from our governance formations, and then we recruit allies into it. But the result of Brown versus Board of Education 1954, of course, is that many of these white nationalists decide to create schools. They call them segregation academies. And they would have their children in white schools, all white schools, private schools. And of course, the fight now for vouchers, wealth transfer, we talked about that too, the transfer of $1 billion in Texas. Iannelli was telling us the transfer, and has interviewed people about that in her show Reconsidering Freedom. But that transfer, which we're now seeing in other states, the indefensible, feckless former White House press secretary, whose perpetual grimace on her face conveys a kind of deep-seated, fear-driven hatred. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, whose father, of course, is one of those narrow Christian extremists flame throwing in Israel right now, the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. You see an expansion of that charter school and voucher work in Arkansas now, matching, maybe even ultimately exceeding relative to scale, what's going on in Texas right now, where you see the roots of it in the 1950s with the segregation academies. We'll take those public tax dollars you pay and give them to our all-white schools as we flee these public schools because we don't want to go to school with you. But of course, the narrative has us believing, some of us, unfortunately and mistakenly, that these black people were chasing white people to get into school to sit next to them. Nothing of the sort was the case, of course. But I'm saying that when you see a headline like this, CVC buying 20% stake in Global Schools Group ISP, what we're saying is that this isn't just a local issue, it's a global issue, and the well-moneyed, the well-resourced ain't never going to want their children to go to school with you, and they are creating and have created and want to sustain and want to give even more money and resources to perpetuate segregated schools while they telling your children that they don't need to read books and they need to worry about getting life skills and maybe learning a trade that's going to be obsolete in 6 months, but they ain't telling you that. They got their children listening to music and developing skills and soft skills like playing with each other as children and going to museums. Oh no, but you need a laptop and learn how to hit this hammer on the right nail. Yeah. And we like, yeah. That's the deep diseducation of the Negro. Goes on and says, buyout firms have rolled up private schools into giant global groups with robust revenues that help garner rich valuations. Parents' desire to secure the best possible education for their children means that they can be reluctant to cut it short, even in the face of rising costs or an economic downturn. And it goes on. So I just mentioned that because in the context of what we're talking about now, because when Fred Gray and them are suing to tell these people, no, you're going to desegregate these schools, it isn't because they somehow believe that white chalk and white blackboards are colder. It means that's where the resources are. And as a principle, no one should be treated differently according to the color of their skin or how they show up in the world after they came out of their mother's womb. These are deeper moral principles. And as Dr. Du Bois said, we are not fighting to become you. If we become you, we've lost our usefulness to the world. Every group must speak its, as Malana Karinga might say, special truth to the world. That's what makes the world go round. That is true equity. And if you want to call it, dare I say, diversity, not the diversity of another arch racist and religious extremist. And I call him a racist because, not because he would bandy about the N-word, although I'm not sure that he wouldn't, but because his cultural logic is wedded to a racial logic. And if you want to understand that, go back in our archive and in class and search for Lewis Powell, who became a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, but at the time wrote a memorandum in the late 60s, early 70s for the Virginia Chamber of Commerce that was shared with the Nixon administration that said, among other things, we must pool our resources and create think tanks to begin to direct the trajectory of this country, which should include deep values, Christian values, what they would call Christian values. I would challenge them and say they are not Christians, in fact. I would take the position David Walker took in 1829 in David Walker's appeal when he says, when you ask them a series of questions that ends up with you being on the floor with a boot on your neck, these are not Christians, in fact, but the devil. David Walker's appeal. It would be worth perhaps a reread for some people who haven't read it before. We're coming up on the 200th anniversary of it in 2029. But so when Lewis Powell, a religious extremist, writes that memorandum, it becomes the impetus a couple of years later for the creation of something called the Heritage Foundation. And you all remember during election season, we went through this history chapter and verse, so no need to do it again. Just go to the archive and you'll find that conversation we had. And for those who think that both parties are the same or you just keep propping up the Democrats, I don't think anybody can hear you now over the clashes in the street. But the point is that, and I'm sure you all are out there, saw a lot of protests. Kamala Harris, I haven't read 107 Days yet, her book yet. I have it. I'll read it at some point soon. But I saw people are protesting and, she's not the president. Why don't you, get up them super radical ideas and go protest Donald Trump or doggone Kristi Noem, who got the green light from the funky white nativist majority Supreme Court yesterday, at least temporarily with that rocket docket, to deport thousands of Venezuelans. If you're one of those Venezuelans who voted for Trump because you too are a racist, go on back. Nicolas Maduro and them waiting for you. And that's not going to be a rough ride for you for a number of reasons. But hey, isn't this what you voted for? No temporary protected status for you, at least in the short term. And Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote another magnificent dissent that will show up again one day if there's going to be an America when those dissents become the foundation for majority opinions. Again, though, can America persist? Can it continue? Well, the answer to that question will go a long way toward answering whether or not Ketanji Brown Jackson's name is added to the lists of the Frank Johnsons and the Charles Hamilton Houstons and the Pauli Murrays. We'll see. It's an open question, but that question is closing very quickly. So, as I was saying, this idea then that this is sustainable hinges on the foundation of this country, and that foundation is racism. And that's unfortunately white supremacy, but that's the objective fact, and that's the objective truth. So when Fred Gray is challenging the court to smash segregation in public education, and when the white flight is trying to go into private education, and then fast forward to now when they're trying to siphon those private dollars like these hedge fund cats are doing globally into these spaces that would be segregated, Judge Frank Johnson says, I'm with you. And Judge Frank Johnson rules in Lee versus Macon County that not only do you have to desegregate Tuskegee, in fact, let me just read you from a very interesting book, and I'll tell you about the author in a minute. Let's continue here. He says, this is what the author says, writing about a man he called his hero, Frank Johnson, Judge Frank Johnson. In fact, this is a biography of Judge Frank Johnson. I'll tell you who wrote it in a minute. He says, in the first days following the integration of Tuskegee High School, white attendant, oh, I'm sorry. You know who tried to block the integration of Tuskegee High School? Frank Johnson's law school classmate, George Wallace. This is another moment when George Wallace stands in the schoolhouse door. It blows my mind. We talked about this when we talked about Fred Gray back in the early part of the year, back in March, early spring. And I tell him this every time I've seen him. It's quite remarkable, and I would encourage everybody to go to the Fred Gray Institute page. You can become a supporter. You can become a regular contributor to support the Fred Gray Institute. I think what they are building there is truly remarkable, and it is a gathering of people. A lot of people of African descent, as he told us on Thursday. He said, I want to build a society where everyone has the right to a quality education, including people who look like me. And then we start talking about what does a quality education look like? Very important. But it's mostly people of African descent, but not exclusively. It's a rich kind of coalition of people, one of every kind of person you can imagine in conversation, trying to build. And there'll be another symposium in the spring of 2026. Stay tuned, in Tuskegee, in Montgomery, in Tuskegee. So, stay tuned for that. But I think it's an important work that has to be done. Now, as I said, George Wallace lived to say Johnson was right, I was wrong. But let's continue. So Wallace is trying to stop this, and it blows my mind. That's what I was saying. It blows my mind because there were a lot of lawyers involved when Gray thought, as a very young lawyer, this man's in his mid-20s, I need some help. Not because I don't think I can do it, but I just don't have the experience. I need another pair of eyes. He calls New York. He calls the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Thurgood Marshall says, bring it up here, man. Let me look at it. Because this is before, the faxes and even the emails, or there's no Google Doc to share. Now, you got to bring that to me. You can mail it, but why don't you come up here? And he introduces him to Robert Carter, who was the youngest attorney to argue in the collective, the case Brown versus Board of Education. He became a judge, a federal judge. And that begins a lifelong relationship between Fred Gray and Robert Carter, Fred Gray and Thurgood Marshall. Fred Gray knows all these people, and then he's in Alabama. So there are other attorneys involved, but when you see Arthurine Lucy go up into the University of Alabama, that's Fred Gray. When you see Vivian Malone, University of Alabama, that's Fred Gray. I'm like, man, it's one dude. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King gets him off for tax evasion on an all-white jury. It's like, how is it possible? Black people create superheroes, you understand? And they walk the earth, whether it be Fred Gray or your grandma. Same thing. Oh, in terms of ways annoying. So anyway, Wallace is trying to stop it. This is what the book says, the biography of one of the early biographies of Frank Johnson. It says, the court summarily enlarged its order, permanently enjoining Wallace and others from, quote, failing to maintain law and order so as not to interfere with school desegregation. Now, you heard in the Selma to Montgomery story we saw at the beginning of our conversation today, what you heard was, in some ways, their rocket docket that they are abusing at the Supreme Court today. But that Judge Johnson, remember Judge Johnson said, okay, I'm going to allow you to march, but you need to stop your mans from going over there today. You need to wait till we had his hearing. And after we have the hearing, I expect Alabama to appeal. So I'm going to bring the feds in, because I know they're on your side. This is what Johnson is thinking, no doubt. I'm going to bring them in, and they're going to be with you, but Alabama going to appeal. So I've already set it up. The Fifth Circuit is ready to hear it. Not the Fifth Circuit of the day, the white majority, white nativist Fifth Circuit that is wreaking havoc in Texas and Louisiana and places like that. But the Fifth Circuit that is whiter then than it is now, but those white people are different. If I sit here and think about it, and if we went down the road now, if this were, class that I was teaching over at Howard Law School, we would probably start thinking about this in terms of the 19th century roots with Plessy. Before that, the civil rights cases. Cruikshank and all those cases, but we would linger over Justice Harlan's dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson, where he also kind of seeds in a little bit of white supremacy by saying, the white race is the superior race, and the only way we would lose that would be to not trust our law to enable to perpetuate this American experiment. I'm using my words now, not his, by allowing the law to apply equally to everyone. It's the right decision, but the wrong logic. White people rule. It doesn't put a chink in our armor to let everyone have the same rights, because everybody having the same rights doesn't displace white supremacy. In fact, the way you might undermine white control is to say everybody doesn't have the same rights. It's a nasty argument in many ways. And now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm considering now maybe I should read that Justice Harlan dissent in Plessy against Kevin Roberts and what he's saying today, because I think in some ways I know in some ways that's what Kevin Roberts is saying in his dissertation on Africans in captivity from the age of the Haitian Revolution, 1791, till the Nat Turner Rebellion, 1831. And that is somehow what he's also saying. I know what he's also saying in his most recent book. It's what he's saying in some ways in Project 2025, because Kevin Roberts and Russell Vogt are religious extremists and they are white supremacists, and they believe that their culture and their values, which is commingled with their concept of race, are the superior ideas. And they think in their full delusion, and then you got to bring in half intellectual half-breeds, not physical, not physiological, not but intellectual half-breeds like Christopher Rufo and the rest of these fools, people at the Manhattan Institute and other places, who will then say you got to take that back to the Greeks and the Romans. This is the heritage of a made-up construct called Western civilization. They think somehow it is superior. They have deluded themselves into that. And that is why one of the great values of plurality is to get everybody in the room so that the people who are mistaken can be given the opportunity to see why. Let's engage in a comparative analysis. This is why when I was working for the school district of Philadelphia almost 30 years ago now, 25 years ago, and we were engaged in that deep conversation that was traveling the country in the late 90s, on multicultural education, for me, plurality doesn't mean adding Ralph Ellison and Toni Morrison to the English class. It means adding the ancient Egyptians, adding Sundiata, adding a parallel rejoinder, and in some ways a preceding document to anything out of quote unquote Greece and Rome. If you're going to read the Greeks, you must read the Egyptians that precede them. If you're going to read the Romans, then you're going to have to read the Central and West Africans. If you're going to read Shakespeare, then you're going to have to bring in the Africans who are writing in Timbuktu, and the poets who are coming out of Somalia and Ethiopia, and the indigenous people and the Chinese. In other words, if we have that conversation, you have far fewer Stephen Millers. This man received an inferior education. This is the diseducation of the white, which allows them to delude themselves into thinking that somehow they are superior because you haven't read more widely. You haven't engaged more widely. You haven't been able to develop a broad sympathy. I would feel sorry for Stephen Miller if he weren't so damn dangerous, but I don't hate him. I pity him. To repurpose Bobby Bland, I pity the fool. But at any rate, so this writer that I'm reading from, quoting Judge Johnson, understand that Johnson's upbringing and background is from a different kind of whiteness in the South. The whiteness, a minority for sure, that is tracking toward a different kind of view. These are some of the white people who were Republicans who voted to put black people in power during Reconstruction. So at any rate, let me continue. In the first days following the integration of Tuskegee High School, white attendance dropped dramatically. By the end of September, because of a segregationist organized boycott, all white students had withdrawn. Most had transferred to segregated high schools in Notasulga and Shorter, used to be a Shorter University, HBCU, while the rest enrolled in private institutes like Macon Academy and Union Academy, which had sprung up following the order. Governor Wallace had not only solicited endowments for these new private schools, this is where they raising money for them private schools, okay? We'll come to the vouchers and charters in a minute because it's an open conversation. But it also gone so far as to provide state liquor stores with collection boxes to help support the academies. So is today like yesterday? No, it's not. In this regard, unlike Wallace raising private money, now the hillbilly horde is tapping your tax dollars in the form of vouchers and charters and transferring it to their racist school districts. And they want to stick the 10 Commandments in every school. And they want to, in Oklahoma, at least this fool Walters did, want to put Turning Point USA in every school. They are not Christians. They're religious zealots. They are waging a war just as purebred as what the Taliban imagines in Afghanistan. Unlike the Taliban, they haven't seized control of the full apparatus yet or been allowed to seize the full control. But like the Taliban, they believe what they believe and they want you to get down or lay down, to quote Beanie Siegel from South Philadelphia. We continue. Tuskegee High School stayed in operation for 5 months with only the 13 black students in attendance. Then on Friday, February the 1st, it was closed on orders from the State Board of Education and Governor Wallace. The order was in accordance with the board's policy of closing schools where the teacher load is not sufficient to justify paying the teachers. That's how they're going to do it. They're going to starve it, right? The children were ordered transferred to other schools in the Tuskegee area. There was only one all-black high school in the Tuskegee area. Macon County was once again operating a dual school system, but the black high school refused to admit the students. And represented by black attorney Fred Gray, this is what the author of this book now brings in, Fred Gray, parents once again filed action in Johnson's court. Gray asked the court for a statewide public school desegregation order. Statewide, not just Tuskegee, not just Macon County, statewide. Gray asked the court for a statewide public school desegregation order based on the theory that the Alabama State Board of Education, acting through its president, Governor George C. Wallace, is presently exercising control and supervision over the entire public school system in the state of Alabama. And guess what? Johnson grants it. This is the first statewide order. Lee, the Lee case, Lee versus Macon County, Georgia. That's very important. It was the nation's first, it was the country's first statewide desegregation order, 1963. Lee versus Macon County of Georgia. By the way, the name of this book, for those who might want to purchase it, and I doubt anyone will, unless it's just somebody like Lloyd or Marlin or some of them bibliophiles. This is Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. Here's the author, a young man. Wait, y'all know that guy? Do you know? Let me show him his name on the front of the book. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently graduated from Harvard College. He's currently studying at the London School of Economics. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. not only has a grasp of political realities and a flair for telling a good story, he has written a book that documents an important era in American history, the 2 decades following the Montgomery bus boycott and the Selma Freedom March, and vividly portrays Judge Frank M. Johnson, a man who understood the virtues as well as the limitations of federalism, who not only symbolized justice, but saw that justice was done during this significant period. Let me just read you from the blurb. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. drove south during his senior year at Harvard College to study Alabama politics. He spent close to a year in the state and he found a hero, Judge Frank Menace Johnson Jr., a man cast in the mold young Bob Kennedy admired, a man who, like Bob's own father, believed in the law, the Constitution, and justice above all, and fought for those beliefs. Now Robert Kennedy has written a book about him. Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. is the biography of the man who turned Alabama into one of the most progressive states in the United States in terms of human and civil rights. He crushed the Ku Klux Klan, invalidated the poll tax, desegregated schools, and recreational facilities. At every step, he was opposed by his old law school classmate, Governor George C. Wallace. Once close friends, the two men grew so far apart that the governor customarily referred to the judge as, quote, an integrating, scallywagging, carpetbagging, bald-faced, lying federal judge, end quote. The story of that confrontation unwinds like classic Greek drama. This is shrewd political reporting and a mature analysis of the civil and human rights issues that shook not only Alabama, but the whole country over a period of 20 years. This man is yesterday like today. You ask if Bobby Kennedy Jr. is the barometer, you got to say no. Can America continue? It's not unusual, I suppose, for a young man to take not only 2 steps back, but a quantum leap backward into something that this guy right here, it'll be interesting to hear this guy right here arguing with his later iteration. I'm sure Bobby Kennedy right now would tell you he ain't changed. Or maybe he wouldn't. I don't know. He might be, maybe ride around here to Rock Creek Park where you may be swimming in one of these feces drenched creeks and ask him But but at any rate, very interesting. And I know I see here in both in Mbongi's on the narrative on the Nubia side and the YouTube side, folks are talking about shutdowns, and there are a lot of people suffering right now. And while Junior Varsity Vance and Trump and his friends are making mockery of you, mockery of us, and cracking jokes, and Propaganda Barbie is saying they're having a little fun, and the MAGA Muppet, I'm sorry, Propaganda Barbie, Carolyn Leavitt, the Propaganda Barbie, and the MAGA Muppet, Mike Johnson's like, oh, he's blowing off steam. You should ignore that. Just get to work. Just get to work. We know what it is, my friends. One of the beautiful things about this moment, even as we are in pain, is that pain clarifies and reveals the realities. Fewer and fewer people are listening to you. This is actually, I was reading this one on the plane coming back. This is yesterday's New York Times. Voters believe U.S. can't heal deep divisions. And by the way, our hearts go out. Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, England. People were killed there yesterday, day before yesterday, Thursday. 2 were killed at a British shul on Yom Kippur. This violence must end. Jeremy Peters and Ruth Igelneck, writing in the New York Times on Friday morning, Americans have markedly less faith in the ability of the country's political system to solve problems that they had 5 years ago, with a large majority now believing that the country is incapable of overcoming its deep divisions, according to a poll by the New York Times and Siena University. No news there, except to elevate the fact that what this federal government shutdown here in the United States, for those of you who are outside the United States, part of our family, our global family, as you would call it, Prof, quite accurately, of course, the global majority, you know that in the United States is now being touched in a way, and they're saying the shutdown won't let the labor numbers be released. Well, our eyes are open now, and more eyes are opening every day, and people are moving away from this idea that somehow the government was going to do anything, this particular configuration, than anything other than what it's doing. But let me continue, and then we'll kind of wind for today, because the question that is being raised now, can America continue? Should America continue? Is a broad question. It is a question of renegotiation. You know, we've been saying for years that this thing is going to have to be renegotiated. And I find no comfort or no pleasure in the trajectory of what's going on now. I just know, as a student of history, as someone who, sits at the center of the creation of this conceptual category framework, that, as far as I'm concerned, is the only way we should be approaching Africana studies. And Africana studies is the point of entry for us in terms of intellectual work. It provides a foundation for everything else. Well, when you're looking at that social structure category and trying to understand things as they have been and as they are, it disabuses you of all illusions, or at least most illusions. And when you have a governance formation conceptual category, which then asks who we have been to each other over the arc of human existence, including these 5 minutes of recent memory, who we are, who we have been, who we will continue to be to each other, it also gives a clarifying lane in terms of really helping us understand how we must act collectively and in community with everyone else on the globe, because none of us are going to survive without the rest of us. Fannie Lou Hamer said it. We were talking about it with the Fred Gray meeting. That is where we're going. So in that process, what we're doing today is really considering this question. We're exploring the question, can America continue? And as you should say, Prof, maybe should America continue? We're, coming out of this conversation we were having this past few days, we connect the past and the present, because this social structure is grounded, the U.S. It's grounded in, and it's reliant on, a global network of unequal labor, a global network of exclusion. That's how the hierarchy works. That's how capitalism, the C word, works. I know there are people who say capitalism can free us, and it can't. We live in a capitalist society. We live in a capitalist world system, absolutely. And we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need shelter. We can use some things for self-defense, others for building the momentum we need to free ourselves from it. So we got to go through it to get over it. But let's be clear, it is not a destination, as Martin Luther King told Andrew Young in Newark after they had met with Ras Baraka's father, Amiri, in 1967. At the height of a rather robust conversation, it's getting a little heated. Dr. King says, see, the problem here, Andy, is you're a capitalist and I'm not. So, we're at the stage now where we can't keep repeating things that we're uninformed on and think we've excused it by saying we all know that. We've all studied the history, we know all that. But wait a minute, no, let's go back to the we all know the history, because I am absolutely very crystal clear we don't. And I'm also very crystal clear that most of the time, people who say that have done maybe even the least studying. We all know about that. Yeah, we know about slavery. We know about African history. But what are we going to do now? No, you don't know. Because if you did, you wouldn't say that. It's one of the clearest ways of articulating that we are not yet prepared to be in the type of thinking. Study has to precede the thinking, and it can never stop. As Asa Hilliard said, nothing more pitiful than to be led for people who haven't done their homework. So we're connecting this memory to examining how this contemporary social structure, which is grounded and reliant on unequal labor and exclusion, is speeding its inevitable and perhaps dispositive existential crisis, meaning this was what was going to happen. Fred Gray and them are at the fount of what, some people might call the second Reconstruction. I've used that language. The 1950s and 60s, which in a way, a century after the 1850s through the 1870s, mostly, is the first Reconstruction, which Thurgood Marshall, Fred Gray's friend, would say gives birth to, and I think Ketanji Brown Jackson would echo that, the Constitution that we are trying to say might be the narrow pathway that might be able to save America. Save the United States of America. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. I was having this conversation on Wednesday night with my law students. Got a chance, my friend and colleague, Lisa Crooms, constitutional scholar, academic, longtime member of the Howard University School of Law faculty, was coming out her office late, and my class starts late, 6:00. And so she, when I came in the room, she was there. She had come out of her office. It was across the hall from our classroom, talking with the students, her students. And we just got into a great conversation around education, because that's what we were studying this week. This week's theme was education, the readings, and the students wrote responses to the readings, and we used that as the point of departure, as we do every week. And so she ended up, what started with a kind of 5-minute embrace, how you doing? Well, everything's good. Ended up being her staying there till almost the end of class. I'm not going to let this constitutional scholar walk out the building. We can pick her brain, and we walk through chapter and verse many of the cases around education, including Lee versus Macon County, and including the desegregation of University of Alabama. And, I told him, I'm going to see Fred Gray tomorrow. Some of the young people in that room did not realize Fred Gray was still walking the earth. And one of the things that I'm so deeply, deeply not only grateful for, but in celebration of, and just blessed to be part of this community. And that's the thing that I'm so deeply grateful for, because it isn't just, a couple dozen students at Howard once a week, or for that matter, several hundred across that law school, or for that matter, 1,000 or so who are at Howard University School of Law, Texas Southern School of Law, North Carolina Central School of Law, Southern University Law Center, Birmingham's Miles College School of Law, the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical State University, Florida A&M University School of Law. It isn't just those thousands or so who are in those law schools, those HBCU law schools, or the thousands more who are in the HWCU law schools who may be introduced to this. Now it is by a factor, exponential factor, thousands and thousands of more who are introduced to Fred Gray, because here we are, to the tunes of tens of thousands every week, in a perpetual conversation, because the university has been jailbroken. And people are saying, well, how do I pay tuition? Well, get a subscription to Knarrative. Come on into Nubia, like a couple of thousand people were in office hours on Monday night, and we continue the conversation, or for that matter, every day of the week in Nubia, where there are different course offerings. Professor Beatty is now going to offer a Coptic class to match the Meta class. So the classical language is coming into formation, and he has put together hour after hour after hour of the deepest and richest and most informed teaching on Egyptian language that you're going to find anywhere. And now Coptic is joining the family. So, I mean, everything from healthcare to astrology to mathematics, all of these things to be moved forward. And of course, with Baba Omatosho, Daniel Black now with the pilot rites of passage emerging as an option, as something that we can move forward? How do we even experiment with the idea of giving root to something that must be done face to face, must be done life to life, breath to breath? How do we take root in entering a formal process that can then be used to extend the work of rites of passage in real time, in person? You know, beautiful thing about being in Cleveland, one of the conversations we were having, you know, during the conversation on the sidelines while we were eating and talking, and got a chance to sit with some brothers and sisters who knew the great Paul Hill, who know the great Paul Hill, who is a legend in Africana rites of passage circles out of Cleveland. And it's just very encouraging to sit with folks who are my age, who are in their 50s and 60s, who as young people went through rites of passage with a pioneer, like in Zinga Warfield Coppic here in Washington, D.C. area, all the various rites of passage folk. And now we have someone in Baba Omotosho, Daniel Black, who has given literally decades of his life in developing in Dugu and in Zinga, and now bringing that experience and bringing that network and bringing that community into Nubia, so that folk can then begin to think with him, think together about how we move forward to have a formal process that connects to thousands of years. Education, in other words, has been rescued. We're in the process of rescuing it from those places where you mortgage your future to get in a classroom, to get in something that's a tenth as rich. It's tenth as important in many ways in terms of substance. And that while you're getting it, while you're saying you're getting it, creates more and more alienation from self, from community. No. That stuff, all the universities, all the K-12, very important, absolutely very important, on the periphery, not the center. This is the community's the center, those things on the periphery. We have inverted it, and in inverting it, we'll continue. So yeah, Fred Gray known by a whole lot more people right now than knew him before we started a little while ago. So let's continue this. So in this process, then, we're juxtaposing these broadly inclusive ways of knowing. These broadly inclusive, that's our, of course, third category after social structure, governance, ways of knowing. These Africana ways of knowing, but not exclusively Africana ways of knowing. When you see people being harmed, many of these people are being harmed because they are not part of this narrow configuration of humanity known as white nativism and whiteness. But we can overflow those boundaries. We can rush past those boundaries. These broadly inclusive ways of knowing, we must juxtapose them against the threat of religious extremism and nationalism of all sorts, the erosion of goals, of pluralistic governance. How do we reason together and work together? And the desperate advance of metaphors of culture war. What we saw, the runt rooster, the DEI peacock, strutting before generals and admirals, talking about killing and toxic masculinity. You got to be this tall or this strong to do this, and no double standards, and we're going to kill. Bruh, that grape you tried to bite down on in that fruit salad didn't even bust, because you wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight, in a food fight, or a fruit salad for that matter. So we're looking at these areas that evoke, that we've evoked so far and that we'll evoke in a minute, to raise this question. Can a country central to the eroding arrangements of the last 500 years, this settler colony that brought together Spanish and French and Dutch and Portuguese and the English to stitch it all together, can this criminal enterprise, this ongoing criminal enterprise born in that eroding arrangement, because it's eroding right now, the half millennia of European settler colonialism, and can this country built on systemic inequality, the thing that Fred Gray has been fighting, continue in its present form in this contemporary world without embracing a true pluralism, a true inclusiveness, which we'll get to in a second? So we realize the fight for justice is never over, but we got to think about it. So let's go through the categories very quickly, and then we'll wind up, because we've been on here now for about almost an hour and a half, and we're not going to hit close to 2 hours. We're going to go through it quickly. The social structure category: who Africans are to other people, what is the arrangement we live in, this affluence and endurance of the United States, then how we narrated on the 4th of July and all this stuff. Now I said they're going to strike some dollar coins with Trump's face on them. I'll be broke I'm not going to pay for somebody putting one of them coins in my hands. I'm going to say, give me one of them 5-cent candies and give me my change back. The affluence and endurance attributed to and associated with the United States are the products of collective labor. We know that. It's no secret. We built this country. Okay, you say that like you're proud of it. Well, you should understand that that collective labor enabled a hierarchy that we suffer from, even if your drawers only did cost $2 because they were stitched together in Taiwan or stitched together in Vietnam or in a sweat factory in Haiti. You shouldn't be happy because you paid $2 for a pair of drawers at the expense of another human who can't eat tonight, whose children are desperate. So don't look at that affluence and the endurance of the United States as attributed to anything other than stolen labor, theft, and then the building of a criminal enterprise on the back of that stolen labor, which is primarily our labor, often the unacknowledged, unnarrated work of African trafficked labor, stolen indigenous resources, and then arranged in a hierarchy, arranged in that hierarchy with a seal of whiteness that relies on a steady inclusion of immigrants from Italy, from Germany. Stephen Miller's grandparents, all these people who are now talking, Junior Varsity Vance's great-great-grandparents or great-grandparents, or Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s grandparents. You came from somewhere else, but you got stitched into this hierarchical seal of whiteness, and you stitch it together for an inclusion that becomes white, and then non-white labor forces continue to form the engine for that ongoing criminal enterprise, this kind of relational whiteness notwithstanding. So all the non-whites who want to be white, who have a relational whiteness, because you think somehow if you just give your fealty to it, that's how they dug up Ben Carson somewhere. Here he is back again. It's not going to save the rest of us, and it's not going to save you. Where are you, Byron? Man, what happened to Byron Scott? But I saw this on display. I was coming through the Newark airport, DC, Newark, Cleveland. It's cheaper. I love going through the Newark airport. I was going through Newark and just seeing this international majority non-white workforce, the people cleaning the bathrooms, the TSA people. God bless the TSA people. No, y'all working without a check. All these folk coming, and I'm watching everybody knows each other, even if they don't know each other by name. I'm seeing a crew going in one direction. These people pushing the wheelchair is going to get the people off the plane, right? And then another crew is coming back this way. They got on the vests. I don't know what their role was. Who knows what their roles? And then you see, these Latinas, and here's some Ethiopians, clearly, because I know the face. And plus, when they pass me, they think I'm Ethiopian. So salam. I just smile and keep going, right? So they pass each other. And one of the little ladies here, a Spanish lady, she's like, and then another one lady's coming this way, Ethiopian. I'm like, look at these beautiful people. I know you mad, Steve Miller. I know you mad, Russ Vo. Don't be mad, thin lip, covering your face with a beard because it's trying to mask your wish for toxic masculinity. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid. Don't fire tens of thousands of people, or you can try as going to court. I mean, Russ, Steve, Donald Trump with your homemade face paint. Bruh, don't be mad. You just mad because ain't nobody blowing no kiss at you passing. I don't know whether that sister over there speak a word of Spanish or this sister over here speak a word of Amharic, but that little gang of 4 or 5 people going this way and 7 or 8 coming this way. Then they go. Then I'm staying, get a cup of coffee, and here come the TSA workers, and I'm listening to every accent I can imagine. It's a beautiful thing. This multilingual majority non-white workers. They are suppliers to the global supply chain, the social structure depending on their efficient work, on the efficient extraction of their labor. And ain't none of them getting paid what they should be paid. And you want to give billionaires more money, and you want to give Argentina $20 billion, most of it going to go back into the pockets of the investors, there's Trump's friends and Malay's friends. You ain't going to prop up the Argentine economy. Meanwhile, you telling people they can't have no health care. And if you get damaged, if you get your foot harmed, if you slip and fall somewhere, they ask propaganda Barbie, so you saying these people should not go to the emergency room? We're not saying that. We're saying that the Biden administration let in tens of millions. Shut up, propaganda Barbie. Because if your baby gets sick, I want her to be able to go to the hospital. And I want that lady baby who blew that kiss baby to go to. You hateful little thing. But I ain't mad at you. I pity you. I feel sorry for you, but you ain't gonna harm nobody else with that propaganda. I tell you, I saw it in the airport. So this fear of demographic change, this white flight from pluralism, produces that anxiety, produces that white lash that generates this perpetually shrinking but indelible minority political position. This ain't most people in the country. Unfortunately, at this moment, they caught the car, and they may accelerate the existential crisis. Can America continue? Should it continue? If I were to poll those sisters and brothers I saw walking in the airport, I would get a different answer. In fact, the answer might be, hey, don't even ask me that. I'm just trying to get through my shift. That is the answer to so many people, which is why we got to get politically engaged, because you don't know. People are terrified out here. Those socialized to fear the other see the cultural exchange as a threat rather than the beauty of the human connection. Those who push back face an uphill battle, like the people where I just came from, talking about it. But persistent effort and commitment yields results. You heard Fred Gray say that. He told Martin Luther King, hey man, we've been at this. I love the way Fred Gray, one of them old Southern black men, you know how black folk just get to, he said, we've been in this business for 10 years. What's the business, Fred? Smashing everything segregated. He tells Martin, we've been in this business for 10 years. This is our best chance. Bruh, I don't care how you do it. You keep them boys and girls, you keep them off the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now you heard my man ask him, say, you know, tell me about this turnaround Tuesday. Fred Gray said, I don't know about turnaround Tuesday, but I tell you what happened. Like, because it wasn't Tuesday, it was Wednesday. Fred Gray's got jokes. I mean, them subtle old black people jokes. You know what I'm saying? Governance, who we are to each other, ways of knowing, the way we talk, cultural meaning making, so very important. And you know, it was interesting. My hometown, Nashville, Fred Gray went to school at the Nashville Christian Institute, which was a private Church of Christ school in Nashville before he went back to Alabama, go to Alabama State. He's very close with the folks at David Lipscomb College, now David Lipscomb University, which was a church founded by Church of Christ. David Lipscomb was a preacher, 19th century or 20th century preacher, white man. And when I was growing up in Nashville, my cousin's Church of Christ, first cousins, you watch my mother's ritual, then you know that, you know, a lot of them, my first cousins, my father's side of the family, many of them Church of Christ. And a lot of them went to David Lipscomb, but they were in the overwhelming minority. There was like 95% white when they went, and overwhelmingly Church of Christ. It was Church of Christ school. That's why they went. Got their education going. Everybody doing well. You know, now I'm second, third cousins coming in now, right? So, but today we were talking about that when we were together. David Lipscomb University is just close to a third non-white. And like over 80% of the students who are at this small university, 3,000 people, are not Church of Christ. And they have a Muslim population that I've been told feels safer there than in most schools in Tennessee. I'm sure the HBCUs aren't part of that, but because I'm sure they probably feel safest to Tennessee State and Fisk, you know, and places like that. Lemoyne, Owen, you know, Knoxville College is still, you know, moving, you know, so I'm sure they feel as safer there than anywhere, but that was unthinkable when I was a kid. So you can have these uphill battles, but you can have, if you have steady commitment, it can yield results. And they got a Fred Gray lecture series. In fact, one of the people who gave it also went to Nashville Christian Institute, came through Oklahoma Christian College, went out to Pepperdine, eventually takes a job at UCLA, and then comes back to the East Coast after going to the University of Buffalo for a while, comes to Temple University, where he still is. A man who was at Nashville Christian Institute with my first cousins is known as Arthur Lee Smith Jr. Now we call him Malefi Kete Asante. Yeah, he grew up Church of Christ in Valdosta, Georgia. So I'm just saying, you can make that kind of progress. He a whole African now. I mean, so the whole thing, and one of the leading intellectuals and thinkers around this question of Afrocentricity, that's him. But I'm saying that it's very important to understand that persistence can crack it. Yet America's convenience and consumer ease disguises these inequalities that are baked into this structure, which leads us to this question. Can a country built on an unequal labor force endure while extracting itself from the rest of the world? That's what Bozo and them are doing. That's what Trump and them are doing. That's Russell Vogt. They think somehow they still got the muscle to make everybody else bow down. Well, guess what? Xi Jinping is like, man, we're getting ready to make hay while the sun shines. We're getting ready to collapse their chest. And in public, they say, we're not trying to destroy the United States. We just want to be an equal power. No. And behind the back door, how are we going to cut them out of everything? Everything from them precious minerals, those rare earth minerals, rather, not precious, rare earth minerals that we have processed, not because you can't get them everywhere, but because we put the money into technology. Africa, as we've been talking about, you read the papers, you see how the expansion of renewables, particularly solar energy, is just taking a quantum leap. We were talking about this on the air this week, also in office hours. We were talking about, as we watched some of the speeches from the representative from Burkina Faso, from Mira Amor Motley from Barbados. We saw President John Mahama from Ghana. We got a glimpse of several others including the brother from Colombia, who they put out the country because they didn't like the fact he spoke at a Trump rally. Well, guess what? We're watching them create space for a different kind of economy to emerge in the world. Is it going to emerge quickly? No. Is it going to emerge right now? No. Is it preparing to try to emerge? Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. And people say, well, that's the world, not the United States. How does that affect me? Well, Mary McLeod Bethune's school, Bethune-Cookman University, was born on October the 4th. This week, it was born. And Ms. Bethune was also present at the founding of the United Nations in 1945 because she understood that the local connects to the global. And as we think about that, as we think about the fact that now Burkina Faso is manufacturing cars exclusively in Burkina Faso, electric vehicles. They're not sourcing anywhere else for the raw materials because, as General Traore says, following in the steps of course, Thomas Sankara, General Sankara, who became President Sankara, we have everything we need in Africa. You the one don't have the rubber trees. You the one don't have these precious metals. You don't. No, we have everything here, and we got the sun in abundance. So we're going to go with the electric vehicles here. It's very important to understand. Yet this question that we must ask ourselves: can America continue? You can't continue by turning inward. You ain't got that kind of muscle, and you ain't got them kind of resources, even with the human resources, which are made up in a growing plurality of people that you pretend to hate, but that you rely on. Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump summoning those military commanders from around the world projects their fear and their weakness. And a dying order will do everything to stay alive. So when he talks about that N-word, yeah, the thing that gives me pause is not the N-I-G-G-E-R, but the N-U-C-L-E-R. I am worried about that. Because now, at this point, who knows what they will do? A madman has the nuclear launch codes, and we acting like we can normalize it. New York Times, get your act together. CNN, get your act together. Or not, because we've moved way past that now. In fact, there's an article in today's New York Times on, I think, give me a second here. We're going to kind of wind this up. Is it the arts page of the Times, or is it the Financial Times? That has this big spread on, it might be the page of the Financial Times. Yeah, the page of the Financial Times weekend, if I can't find it quickly. Life and Arts, I think, is where it is. And if it's not in Life and Arts, I'll just tell you about it rather than show it to you. But I'd like to be able to show you the picture. It's not in Life and Arts. So it might actually be in the business section, which would make sense because the business section is talking about the YouTubers who are now sourcing and resourcing the house and loans collecting. Maybe it was in yesterday's FT because I'll be going through the papers quickly. Today, no, it might be in yesterday. Anyway, the YouTube folk now are paying the Hollywood studios to rent their stuff as they making movies now. They're going straight to YouTube, and they're talking about how that could erode and reconfigure even Hollywood model. Yeah. So let Ellison and them pay all that money. I don't know. Well, Google just paid some extortion money to Trump, so I'm not going to get into that. But this question then of fear and weakness is being projected in part because they're desperate, and the government shutdown has a larger ideological reason as well. Vote Johnson, Mike Johnson, Huckabee, and them. They represent a different model. One rooted in Christian nationalism, what they would call Christian nationalism, what I would say is religious extremism, where pluralism is cast as evil. Their version of society requires the narrowing of the curriculum of the country to the one true faith. They reject any notion of pluralism. I don't even want to use the word democracy. It's an overburdened word. It didn't exist in Athens or Sparta. And imagine that. They talk about Athenian democracy. There was no democracy in Athens for women, for captives. No. There's no democracy. They stop using the word to demos. I understand why you want to use the shorthand, but what we saw Hegseth strutting up and down in front of those generals and admirals do, he talked about this. This is the Sparta, not Athens, but Sparta. And in other words, you want to talk about, okay, let me just pause here so everybody can be crystal clear about this. If you want to talk about democracy in these people, you've revealed that you don't understand even what they claim to be representing. Greek democracy, Greek democracy. The idea of it is Athenian democracy, and it will be counterposed against the Spartans. Y'all saw the movie The 300, right? That's what that clown is strutting up and down talking about, the anti-democracy. But anyway, the question arises, can America govern itself? Can the United States continue to govern itself or continue as a world influencer with deep equity not on the table? Especially if one faction that has temporarily caught the car of the governance, the federal apparatus, rejects deep pluralism altogether. In some ways, you can see the roots of it in Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s biography of Frank Johnson. Bobby Kennedy in here writes and talks about the limits of federalism. What are the limits of federalism, Bob? Especially since you're now over HHS and want to impose your crazy ass worldview. Clearly that worm hadn't entered your mind yet when you left Harvard and sat at the knee of Frank Johnson. You want to impose that worldview on everybody. What about the limits of federalism, my friend? Oh, you're just an ideologue. Let's go to governance. The second of the 6 categories. This is going to go pretty quickly from there. Governance. Fred Gray's legacy represents governance, who we are to each other from within. Legal warriors of faith. Educators of faith. I don't mean just Christian faith. I don't mean just Muslim faith. I don't mean just Jewish faith. I don't mean just organized religion faith. I mean the deep spirituality that says, I am because we are. We are because I am. Pushing us closer to broader ideals. That Lee versus Macon County case is very important in that regard. And, Aisha was making this point. Professor Bell Hardaway was making this point when she said one of the key elements of the Lee versus Macon County case, the Tuskegee desegregation case, which becomes a statewide desegregation case, the first in the country in education, public education in that regard, 1963. The order, not Brown, but now you got to make it happen almost 10 years later. She says, is the affidavits. This was the delivery system they used to get the testimony, which means the perspective, which means the opinion, which means the desires of the plaintiffs, of the people, of the parents and the children who are doing the living and dying in that state, in that city, in that school. This is what we want. And when you read that stuff, what you see come out very clearly is the fact that our people wanted better for their children. They did not dream of whiteness. You got to read it for yourself. You got to get this away from this narrative that we desired whiteness. Sister Patrice Grimes, shout out to my friend, Professor Grimes, Dean Grimes, who was at the University of Virginia for many years, who actually worked on the papers of the Georgia Teachers and Educators Association, the GTNEA, which is, of course, the Georgia branch of the American Teachers Association. All those books up there. The histories of the Black teacher unions, the Black teacher associations, the ones who did so much work. And, I was thinking about that because Patrice was there and she was talking about the importance of having the people who do the living tell the stories. See, we have baked our people into this lie. When you talk to people, what did y'all want? We wanted resources. I mean, I told y'all before, we were talking about the 50th anniversary, 60th anniversary Brown versus Board of Education, when they brought some of the folks who were in the so-called Little Rock Nine and people from South Carolina in. Brother Briggs came, and just watching that elder shed tears on the stage at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, because Briggs versus Elliott, which in many ways is the centerpiece case. I can see Kathy Adams and I can see Bernie Gallman and certainly Cecil Williams and other things. Yeah. It should be Briggs versus Elliott, not Brown versus Board of Education. They were all important in those 5 cases, but the lead case in many ways, Briggs, B-R-I, not B-R-O. So I guess alphabetically, Briggs should come first. But anyway, he's saying, Brother Briggs is saying, we want a bus. We want a school bus. What they told the great Horace Tate, who was a principal in Greene County, Georgia, that's short for professor, like they call John Henry Clark Fest. The elder said, all we want is a bus. We need a school bus. So our children ain't got to walk. The white kids ride by them. The book, The Lost Education of Horace Tate, by the great Vanessa Siller Walker. Vanessa Siller Walker was Patrice Green's dissertation advisor at Emory. She was there. I said, you met Horace Tate? She said, yeah, we been in his house. We sitting there talking. I helped them go through the papers. Like, man, come on. So when Aisha Bell Hardaway says in the pursuant to the Lee versus Macon County case, when you read the affidavits, when you read the sworn testimony, what these people wanted and why they wanted to integrate these schools, what then comes out is the governance formation. We are trying to get resources for our children. We want our teachers. When Leslie Fenwick writes Jim Crow's pink slip and 100,000 black teachers and principals lose their jobs in the wake of Brown, we don't want that. When you look at the Equal Justice Institute was reporting a couple of years ago that there is a racially integrated school that started in Sumter County, Alabama, about 45% black, 45% white, 54% black, 45% white, in a county that's like 80% black. So it doesn't match the demographics, but it's deeply integrated. This is like 2018, 29. This, of course, EJI Institute. Our brother who wrote Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson, who has the EJI Institute, and of course the museums and the entities there in Montgomery area. Very important work. Yeah, but they're charter schools. And they're schools where maybe you can get a voucher. So do you sue to get the public money? Because charter schools are public schools. Sankofa Freedom Academy in Philadelphia, K-12 Freedom School, is a freedom school. I was very proud to be one of the people who worked on the proposal to get that money from the state of Pennsylvania. But again, does that violate the principle that Fred Gray and them were talking about? I'm sure they would prefer not to have public schools or charter schools, but if you got more options, then you got more ways of inserting your worldview, your ways of knowing into the conversation. And if everybody respects it, theoretically, I guess it could work. Because as Du Bois said in 1935 in his essay, Does the Negro Need Separate Schools, in the Journal of American Education, what the Negro needs is education, not segregated education, not integrated education. But guess what? Can America continue if you then have this radical diversity, which says, I don't have to have a commitment to that funky flag? Or to your nasty Pledge of Allegiance, which I never wanted to say anyway, which I was mumbling under my breath anyway. I mean, again, be careful, friends, because that white nationalist thing may just finally end up being the thing that kills it all. And who knows, maybe that's a better thing. Ways of knowing, the third category, pluralism of ways of knowing, is at stake. This U.S. experiment requires respecting many different ways of knowing, at least theoretically. The faith traditions, the spiritual traditions, the ways of knowing of Africans, of indigenous people, Muslims of all types, scientific rationality, immigrant experience, wherever you go, Contrast that with Ryan Walters and them in Oklahoma, the attempt to bust unions and impose narrow exclusionist, racial, religious extremism on everybody. Walters chooses the billionaire-driven market because he can't control the Oklahoma public education the way he wants to. But we have human capital. Our numbers outmatch them. Can there be a common curriculum for broadly inclusive social structure in the United States without mandatory white Christianity or white religious extremism? Which ways of knowing nurture other people? And which ways destroy plurality? The Muslims, the places I've been in, Muslim countries. It's like Edward Wilmot Blyden says in his book, in the 19th century, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. This is a Christian minister who goes to West Africa and says, I'm a Christian, but these Muslims treat difference very much better than the Christians. And maybe this open ideological conflict must play out. Again, to evoke David Walker, you do not look a moral wrong in the face and pretend that this is all cool in the name of peace. No, this is a morality play. And guess where we saw it, friends? In the so-called civil rights movement. Think about that. Heroes and villains. George Wallace is a villain. Jim Clark, the sheriff, is a villain. The safety director in Birmingham, Eugene Bull Connor, is a villain. They still narrated as villains. Them state troopers standing up with the Evan Pettis Bridge are villains. You can narrate them as a villain historically, but when you look at one in the eye in 2025, you somehow say, oh no, we just got to get together and we got to be You don't say that when you watch the movies and start singing, there was one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. That's what the civil rights movement provided, shaped in real time by mass media. The same mass media that will let a madman vomit all over them and say, well, he's taking some extreme language. You didn't say that in 1960 when you were safely ensconced in Manhattan writing about what was going on in Selma. The sheriffs, the schoolhouse door stands. But now you want to act like it's cool? Oh, let's go to the next category. We're winding up now. Science and technology. The human capacity to interact with technology and shape the material world. It's interesting. Flying into Cleveland, voice came over the air, and I forget the brother's name. I should have wrote it down. Latino. Rodriguez. United Airlines. And he said, my co-pilot is, I don't know if he said his first name, must have, but Lee was his last name. I'm thinking, is he Asian? Then mid-flight, the other guy gets on the microphone and you hear the accent. Clearly he's Asian. I'm loving it. I don't know if Charlie Kirk would have been nervous, but I was elated. I'm thinking, see, this is the way it's supposed to be. I love it. I'm tired of hearing, well, coming in. We're getting a little headwind, but we'll maybe get in 10, 15 minutes early. No, my name is, co-pilot is Lee. Then the guy came on, we're getting ready to report. I'm like, I love this. It took me back. We were on a flight from Aswan. Those of you who've been to Kemet know. We flew to Abu Simbel one year. Had a small enough group. This was when I was taking Howard students. Don't do it anymore. By the way, the Kemet 2026 tour will be that website will be going live shortly. So if you want to go to Kemet with us next August, first 2 weeks of August, start getting ready. We were flying and I was in the back of the plane, a little small plane, probably seated maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 people, probably fewer, probably much fewer, maybe 60 people. And so we had maybe about 20 students. So I'm in the back and we're flying and then we land. And as we're getting off, I hear people start clapping. Now, it's not unusual in Africa or other places. When you land, you clap. You're glad to be back on the ground, right? It's a beautiful thing, ways of knowing. But no, this clap was after the plane had landed and taxied. And now we're getting out here. And I'm like, what happened? Somebody saved somebody up front? And then we getting off, but the line was real slow. And as I got it was a short plane, so it didn't take me long to see why it was taking so much time. People were taking pictures with the pilot, one by one. She was beaming. Muslim woman, Arab woman. The pilot was a woman. And of course, our kids, which mostly women, I did the same thing. It was just a beautiful thing. And she was beaming because guess what? That's the first time she saw Africans from the United States in that number. And she just flew us to Abu Simbel. That's the world I want to live in. From the global aviation industry to the people walking through the Newark airport, that science and technology showcase pluralism in action. Human ingenuity is comprehensive. All people produce it. A cross-cultural ingenuity like that goes a long way toward reminding us and helping people who might push back against it. Hey, this person has your life in your hands and you are perfectly safe. Yet Eric Schmidt, as we talked about a month ago, he said, no, this is for us and nobody else. You go to hell, Senator. I'm sorry, I would tell you to go to hell. You live in hell every day. Because I'm sure both of those plane rides, the plane ride to Cleveland or to Abu Simbel, would have driven you pitch crazy. And you would have figured some way to inject that poison into your next funky ass speech. Technology and wealth are often hoarded for elites, not distributed for collective flourishing. Shout out to Tuskegee. Heard Shauna talking about this Monday before last, raising up the fact that Tuskegee, where Fred Gray was born, has revived its aviation program to the point where its first graduate rolled out of the university. And then somebody called Shauna and said, yeah, my niece is in the next one. She's in the aviation. Pilots being produced at Tuskegee again. Lord, who controls science and technology determines the future of the species. This is where we are now in the billionaires race. And this is where we are with Nubia and Knarrative. Independent platforms, the science and technology. We got the tech expertise. We got that. The technological present. Even as they try to seize it for these deep fake AIs, and the president of the United States putting crazy racist shit on the official YouTube accounts. I'm sorry, White House accounts and federal government accounts. Scott Turner, you one of them Negroes, you one of them blackface white supremacists. Why are you spewing this clear violation of the Hatch Act propaganda from the website and the official platform of the Housing and Urban Development? Come on. We see how tech is wielded as a weapon in the cultural war of America's future, but we also see how science and technology can be that platform to help us understand if the world doesn't look like this illusion they're trying to get us to buy into. Cultural meaning making, the fifth of the 6 categories. The airport itself, I was going through in Newark. But same thing in Chicago. Flew back through, connected in Chicago, and came back to D.C. Chicago United Airport, United Wing, the hub, which is vast, of course. Kim Delaney, my God, y'all. The airport itself was really something, a cultural performance, really. And it's interesting because that cultural performance, you see the inclusiveness. Meanwhile, Trump rallies, Hexas peacock strut represent the opposite of the cultural project we're talking about, this myth making. And movement and memory is Our final category, because when we think about movement and memory, again, the relationship between cultural meaning making and movement memory is clear. Cultural meaning making is the question in the Africana Studies framework that helps us understand in any particular moment, how do we create culture? Cultures shift over time. We know that. But we also know there are similarities. That's where we go back to movement and memory. Ways of knowing to understand the roots of it. But in any particular moment, you will see cultural moments frozen in time and integrated. When I go through airports, I'm always looking for something distinctive that might have an Africana gloss. The Arcadia Publishing Company, for example, when you go in airports now, going to little bookstores, you'll see these little books on wherever you are, whatever city you're in. Sometimes they'll have a Black people in Cleveland or Black people in Santa Fe or Black people in Manhattan, and you can get that book. They're almost like picture books with some wording in it. Atlanta is good for those, for example. Also Memphis and Columbia, South Carolina, you might see those books. But typically, every city, of course, will brand itself. So you go through Chicago, you see the Chi t-shirts, you see the ATL in Atlanta, the airport designations, which have then become cultural markers as well. In Cleveland, I was there, and we're sitting there and they watching the game. Why? Detroit Tigers beat the Cleveland Guardians, formerly known as the Indians. And he's like, this Midwest thing is very rustic. I'm talking with brothers and sisters in Cleveland. I rode the train in from the airport to the hotel. I like to ride the train. I want to ride the transit and get that vibe. I'm listening to the speech of these young bulls in Cleveland, and it sounds so much like Philadelphia that I'm like, wow, this is crazy. But you could also see the distinctiveness. So that cultural meaning making means everybody gets to pick and choose how they make culture in their particular moment. But then how do you string those cultures together? And this is where I'm going to end for today. Well, before I do this, let me just go back to governance just for a minute, because I pulled this off the shelf. Although state history, this is the history of the Alabama State Teachers Association, because some of Fred Gray's teachers at Alabama State are in here. And I just wanted to mention the fact that during the Montgomery bus boycott, that the teachers had their meeting. The American Teachers Association, thousands of teachers, met in Montgomery. They were scheduled to meet in Montgomery in 1956 as the boycott was in full swing. Let me just read to you from Jerome Gray, Joe Reed, and Norman Walton's history of the Alabama State Teachers Association. In 1956, as the boycott continued in 1956, tensions grew. The protest affected Black Montgomery teachers as it did all other citizens. ASTA, the Alabama State Teachers Association, which was to meet that year in Montgomery and Alabama State College. So it wasn't the ATA, it was the ASTA, which makes this more impressive. Was advised by Montgomery reactionaries to cancel its 1956 meeting. So you had some white people, and I'm sure some Black people, y'all shouldn't come here. It's too much trouble here. But this advice was rejected. Nevertheless, many teachers had apprehensions about coming to Montgomery. The executive committee took steps to assure their safety and calm their anxieties. In the March ASTA news, the following extra was addressed to the association members. There have been many rumors spread through the state concerning the bus boycott, which has existed in Montgomery since December 5th, 1955. We do not wish to have any member of the association remain away from the annual convention because of any high-sounding rumors. For this reason, members of the executive committee of ASTA have complete assurance from the governor, the sheriff, and the city commission, the social structure, the white nationalist, the racist social structure, that no member will be intimidated in any way, either on the highways or during the 3-day stay in Montgomery, as long as they stay, quote, within the law, end quote. Now, that means you got some fools out there to probably mess with them. The grandparents of these funky men with handkerchiefs on their faces trying to do the dance like little marionettes, trying to mess with people in the streets today. But it's too much money about to be spent by these people for them to ignore that. The communique ends with this, which in this case would mean safe and sensible driving and conduct becoming a citizen and a member of the association. I'm going to read the reaction now. They write, for the 8,000, so this ain't the American Teachers Association, the Black teachers from all over the South. This is just Alabama. 8,000 Black teachers come to the ASTA. For the 8,000 ASTA members who convened at the 73rd annual session, 73rd annual session in 1956. That means that goes back to the 19th century. Y'all stop playing with Black people about we were not educators. If you open your mouth and say that, you're not studying. It says, for the 8,000 ASTA members who convened at the 73rd annual session, ASTA provided courtesy/hospitality labels they could put on their cars to ensure protection from harassment by state, county, and city police. Hundreds of teachers participated. Hundreds of teachers participated in the bus boycott. helping with the machinery established to aid transportation for boycotters throughout the county and city of Montgomery. Teachers also took the lead as the ideas and techniques of the economic boycott spread. Oh, watch out. Wasn't just buses, spread to other types of businesses and to other Alabama cities. For example, in Tuskegee, under the leadership of the Tuskegee Institute's C.G. Gamillion, that would be Dr. Charles Gamillion, another case Fred Gray argued, Gamillion versus Lightfoot, that busted. This is a message to all you damn segregationist gerrymandering bastards. Gamillion versus Lightfoot broke up the gerrymander in Alabama. Is today worse than yesterday? Is yesterday worse than today in the case of this issue, redistricting and gerrymandering? Oh, actually, Gamillion was a 15th Amendment case. It was a voting rights case. Didn't go through 14th Amendment, didn't go through equal protection, but it was a 15th Amendment case, which means the under-imagined 15th Amendment was at play in Gamillion. So is today worse than yesterday? Not in the case, yes, in the case of gerrymander. This was Charles G. Gamillion, Dr. Gamillion, who worked at Tuskegee Institute, medical doctor. And it says, for example, in Tuskegee, under the leadership of Tuskegee Institute's C.G. Gamillion, a boycott closed scores of businesses that refused to hire Black workers and changed the economic and the political face of the area. ASTA continued to emphasize that Black teachers had an obligation to teach the truth about the real position of Black people in American society. That's very important to understand. They talking about critical race theory. Oh, critical race theory. Critical race theory. We talking about the 1950s. And these were Black teachers at Black schools that produced the Claudette Colvins and others, as we've talked about. So let's be very clear about that. So finally, movement and memory. Go in with this little story. I'm walking through the Newark airport, and I thought it may be a little chilly in Cleveland. So I put on a jacket, a little light jacket, my Negro League, one of my Negro Leagues jackets. And I'm in the bookstore looking to see if there's a book there that I don't have. And I'm reading through, actually, I haven't bought it yet, but Lionel Richie's new memoir is out. I'm reading about his time in Tuskegee and about when he was in school. He was thinking about Malcolm X. Very fascinating, very interesting. The language is real accessible. I'm just saying. And the lady says, excuse me, what do you know about that? I said, what? Now I knew she was talking about the Negro League jacket, because Black people will say something to me in the governance formation when I'm having, I see you. Okay, what's going on? Yeah. And I said, oh yeah, Negro Leagues, I'm a big fan of Negro Leagues. She said, oh, my coworker knows about the Negro Leagues. I said, really? She said, let me call him. He wrote a book on Jackie Robinson. I'm thinking, really? She said, yeah, he's here. What you mean? Oh, I think he works in the magazine store. She said, no, he works at the Coat store around the corner. I said, oh, really? I got a minute. Let me go around there and see him. She said, okay, I'm going to call him. She comes back. I pay for the magazines I bought. And he said, come around there. So I go around to the Coat store. Mr. Mac Williams is standing there behind the counter. Mr. Mac Williams said, I wrote a children's book on the Negro Leagues. I said, really? He said, I might have one in my bag. He said, excuse me. So he calls this Latina lady in to take over the counter. He disappears for 2 or 3 minutes, comes back with this. Jackie Robinson and the Negro Leagues, Mac Williams, my man Mac Williams, artwork by David Early. His sons, here he is right here. We took a picture. There's Mac Williams, writer, musician, composer, lifelong baseball fan, Jackie Robinson, Negro Leagues, his 3rd book. I said, it's your 3rd book? He said, yeah, and I'm getting ready to write another one. And so, of course, I made him sign it for me. That's my man signed. And we took a picture. I'm saying, if I hadn't had that jacket on, movement and memory. Then we started talking about baseball. He's just old enough to remember Willie Mays with the Mets, not with the Giants, but his father saw Mays play at the Polo Grounds. So we just stand there talking, man. It was a beautiful thing. And, this is where movement and memory comes on. How do we remember these influences? How do we remember these moments? We all contribute. We all bring our brick. Was the Negro Leagues inevitable? Yeah, because we're in a racist society. Should it still be around? I think some variation of it should still be around. Is America sustainable? Will it continue? Should it continue? I don't know. You should not discriminate by anybody throwing a ball around. But I tell you, some of you Black kids who are now thinking about going to the University of Alabama, maybe you should reconsider and think about Tuskegee, because if they're going to treat you racist, which means Alabama was called progressive by Bobby Kennedy Jr. before the worm ate his brain, and now we're in 2025 and it's a red state. No, ain't no red state. It's underorganized. And the economic power that would cause Dr. Gamillion and them and say, while y'all staying off the buses in Montgomery, we're going to stay out the stores in Tuskegee. That same thing can say, well, while y'all trying to vote us suppress in Alabama and break up the districts, we're not going to run up and down your football field in Tuscaloosa unless or until we renegotiate the terms of all this. Watch how quickly they become civil rights activists. If you stop playing for Auburn, if you stop playing for the University of Alabama. Fred Gray, by the way, filed the lawsuits that integrated both those schools. His ministry of law and faith is part of a long struggle of faith warriors who use not only their beliefs, and he quoted, was it Micah, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly? He quoted that, but then he took that and put it on the end of a law degree and went into court and smashed stuff. Movement memory continues to live. Our task today is to remember those who came before us, to take that momentum of memory. And I don't just mean those who came through captivity. I mean their parents and their grandparents and their great-great-grandparents all the way to the origin of humanity who didn't. Our ancestors had ancestors. And if we do that in this moment when this country and the world is existing in a tension between its pluralist reality and the true believer, the true white narrow nationalist religious extremist rejection of pluralism, if we do that, realizing that the affluence of this criminal enterprise rests on our labor, the labor of those it marginalizes or is trying to marginalize, if we understand our governance formations are under siege by these anti-democratic moves, but that we have everything we need to break their political backs, if we do that, understanding that our ways of knowing are generous and we maintain that generosity while also firming ourselves to the fact that we have a moral struggle against real enemies. If we do that, understanding that our science and technology, our use of science and technology can create the inclusive platforms that allow us to have these conversations and connect in real time, so that while they're trying to play whack-a-mole and knock us down, we have overwhelmed them by becoming aware of each other and then forming in real time to overwhelm them. If we understand that our cultural meaning making need not be split between inclusive joy and exclusionary fear. And finally, if we will draw upon the movement and memory of our ancestors and draw upon our elders to regain the momentum that we have not lost, but we have simply underutilized, then the answer to whether America can continue, whether the United States can continue, will become a secondary question to the real question. What can we learn from this brief sojourn in this criminal enterprise that will help us build the kind of world we want to be in, where a flag or a citizenship card or wherever you want to name it is completely secondary or tertiary or irrelevant to the way we want to live in this world and maybe even beyond.
Irrelevant. I like it.
Yeah.
I just want to, before we, first of all, the model for what athletes can do has already been revealed with the WNBA, from social justice movements to this current collective bargaining agreement. They have set the terms, and you teach people how to treat you. And so and they're in solidarity with one another. Whether they all agree or not, we don't know. But we know that they're standing on business together against the power structure that governs them. But they're governing themselves. And I think that's showing the way in this WNBA finals right now. I also want to remind people, just a little housekeeping, on Saturdays we learn, on Sundays we heal. Dr. Narissa Williams alternates with Dr. Senyata Amin. They do mental health and physical holistic healing, which is Dr. Senyata's bailiwick. Dr. Mario Beatty, I'm just about to go back in, has restarted also the Metanetra class from the beginning, which for those of you who missed the first round, he's going back, and he has, I just spoke with him, he's adding more different nuances and elements to that class that he did, in addition to the Coptic class, to your point. Dr. Daniel Black, it's a small cohort that starts tomorrow, but it's the beginning because it's the first time he's ever done this virtually. And based on how well this goes, and I imagine it's going to be amazing because I'm moderating it as well with him. Not that it's amazing because I'm moderating it, but I'm I can't wait to go through the experience myself. I imagine we're going to keep offering this rites of passage because we have to get really solid in who we are so we can attack this thing. But a lot of us are still rooted in things we shouldn't be rooted in, and this is a way for us to get whole. And that's the way forward. The boycott is, we keep using Target as an avatar for what we can do, but this can be done in every area. This country, the world depends on Black dollars. We spend more than $2 trillion. I didn't believe the number that kept coming out until that happened. But it's very real. As these companies are struggling, they're feeding their shareholders, but you're not feeding the people that come into your stores. You're not paying attention to the people that make your business a business. You worried about shareholder numbers and the stock trading and all of the stuff, but you're not dealing with how you make your money, which is people showing up, buying your stuff. And the people is us. The people is us.
Yes.
I know it may not be grammatically correct, but you know what I'm saying.
The people is us. That's the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. I don't want to miss. I saw as it passed through quickly as thank you, Cynthia, on the Nubia side for raising the fact that these funky ICE agents did come through Chicago and South Shore. They snatched up some Black babies. I know you talked about that. Friday, the governor of Illinois ordered the state agencies to evaluate the treatment of those children that were snatched. This is the federalism that we were talking about. In other words, this pushback. So it's not that they're not going to try it, but what is going to be revealed are the limits. And maybe this is what Bobby was writing about before the worm ate his brain. The limits of federalism. States' rights work both ways. And they've been where they
came to Brooklyn. I don't think you remember when they came to Brooklyn?
Yeah.
And unleashed all of the people.
Yeah.
They haven't been back. I don't know if that's the way forward, but I also want to remind people we are on Google's platform called YouTube, and it's your generosity of spirit. Why we created Nubia in the first place was because of the unformed, wild nature of people that would drag their knuckles in and try to disrupt what we were doing. Whereas the clean glass of water is always in Nubia Knarrative. We're here because we're using all tools.
We do, but we pour clean glass wherever we are. But Nubia, they're right.
What I'm saying is, I reported on this week that two things are happening. First, Google has allowed for all of the people that were banned for misinformation and disinformation and spreading, hateful speech to come on back. So that has happened. They also, as you mentioned, pledged fealty from the beginning to this regime, and also just gave them money. And they are also blocking through the Google search algorithm, which is also paid for space. So, those first few items are paid for when you search for something, whether it's a product or whatever, those first few items are paid for. But now they're also suppressing, if you Google search dementia and Donald Trump, or the AI there says, we don't have the capacity to, we don't have any information about this. You put it Biden instead, there's a whole laundry list. So there's a willful misinforming or suppression of knowledge. And the one thing that we know is knowledge is power. So if they are purposely doing this, we have to find different ways. This is why I'm saying I'm not disparaging the people that are on our YouTube space right now. Hello to you. I'm saying that we have to be very intentional and mindful that these spaces that we're in don't mean us any good. So we have to know that we should have our own Negro League, which we do. So
that's a very good, absolutely. Because it could go away in an instant. That
Correct.
Is so
that too. That too. That's right. But the suppression is interesting because we search with our earnest understanding. It's like, I've been searching. The way you've been searching has changed because the information that you're being. So I wanted to shout out Ahmad too, we have a long-term project. We're not just a compendium, Dr. Carr. This brother, my God, I don't know where he came from, but we're creating our own search. You can already search the compendium. That's being expanded. We're going to have resources of like doctors and places where we can go and trust. So we have the bookstores already Black owned, but now we're expanding that. I've tasked the crew with like more resources because we're going to be our own savior. But we also need to trust the information that we're getting, and it's really hard to do that in this current iteration where everything has been sold out. Everything's been sold out. They have So I just wanted to say that, get that out.
No, it is. Oh my goodness. Well,
All right.
we'll see
Well,
each other tomorrow, and then Monday night office hours. And oh yeah, I should mention, shout out to my people, Talladega, Alabama. I was going hard, Alabama. We were leaving the hotel, and I saw Miss Gray coming out. I had my Tuskegee joint on. His face lit up. I said, "Come on, man! You know I got to rep this Gigi. Come on, brother!" So I figured I put on some Talladega this morning. And also, if you get a chance, y'all, let me just show this one book. I actually was looking for the Talladega murals are at in Talladega College. That's Hale Woodruff. His murals on the Amistad, and I was looking for the book this morning because I wanted to show everybody. But you can go back in the archive, you see. But while I was looking for it, I saw the book that I mentioned when I was in Atlanta last week. The good sister Tina Maria Dunkley, who was the founding curator to put together the Clark Atlanta University Art Collection, where you see the Hale Woodruff murals there. This is her book, and you can still get it. It's called In the Eye of the Muses, Selections from the Clark Atlanta University Art Collection. And that is one of the images from Hale Woodruff's murals. It's also on the back in the context of, wow, it almost floats when you put it there. That's interesting. Oh, that's because this the jacket is broad. It also has a DVD. You can see the DVD there, which gives you the continuing holding. She did her graduate work on that with the great Richard Long, the ancestor Richard A. Long. And when you see this, it's going to she gives you a glimpse of the art annuals. The art annuals were the collections from 1950. This is like from 1950 to 59, but it was decades of when they would bring to Atlanta University the great artists, Black artists. Like this is 1942 to 1949. And then you see she's got this kind of laid out. For example, here's some pieces. Here's Charles White's To the Future, the great Charles Wilbert White. Maybe next week I'll show you all a piece I just got. Kerry James Marshall has 2 new catalogs coming out. And I got one of them, Rhythm Master, his comics. They finally published that. But you can get this. It's called In the Eye of the Muses. And I just want to thank Professor Dunkley, because I saw her in Atlanta. We saw her at the Auburn Avenue Research Library, and I'd seen her at Clark Atlanta the day before. So
that is a beautiful book. And those of you who are, new to narrative, again, you can't get to Nubia without being a narrative. Spend a little time. The You Should Know section. Dr. Carr does a whole piece on Charles White. If you don't know who that is, it's there's so much. So I've been putting stuff in hard drives, right? Like just creating all these little hard drives of all of our content. And it has taken me down memory lane from episode 1 all the way through, and all of the different things we've done in between. And this is a lot of work that you've put in over the last 5+ years. As we go into 300, but not just 300 episodes here, office hours, the You Should Knows, My Life in Books, which hasn't come out yet. Like there's so many things. And I just want to thank you for your time, because it's
thank you. Yeah, you're right. Going through it will give you another. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. You're right. And like I told you, I would do that. If I would probably just spend most of my waking hours doing that, just going back through what we did, because those are points of entry, and then they just become something else. So I saw somebody in Nubia, I think, just say South Carolina State is playing today. Well, everybody's playing. Delaware State. The young cat's doing all right up there. They need to form a receiver for the Eagles. What's his name? Deshaun Jackson. Coach Jackson. Savannah State playing South Carolina State. Them Negroes about to tear up everything. And somebody just asked me about a source for the Martin Luther King. That was Andrew Douglas's book. That's where I read the quote. Andrew Douglas, who's a professor of philosophy at Morehouse, opens the book with the discussion that King is having with his lieutenants. And he tells Andy Young, the problem is that you're a capitalist and I'm not. And it's got the footnote in there. It's probably in the MLK papers. So actually, shout out to my man Akinyele Umoja, who grew up in Church Christ as well. Fred Gray was a friend of his father's. They were both alumni of National Christian Institute. In fact, I wonder, I don't want to, well, I'm going to stop there because that's an open question for me. Anyway, that's another story. But thank you, Pri.
The book you held up is already out of stock, which they need to.
Is it?
They need to run you a check. here's the good
No,
news.
no. Yeah.
Narrative.com with the K, Narrative with the K. We have 300 plus Black-owned bookstores. Find one in your area, and it's done by state. So you can find one in your area and call them, and they can order it. And that way that money goes to that bookstore, and you're able to support local. Okay, because we got to be accountable.
Oh, well, let me say that should extend as well to the institutions that aren't bookstores. So we probably need to add. I don't even know how we would do it. Probably had to call Arnett Hall. Benjamin Trevor Arnett Hall is the former library at Clark Atlanta, was the library for Atlanta University, and it is the current home of the honors program and the art gallery. They sell the book there. So in other words, they sell from the art galleries. Hampton does the same thing at their art. You saying it's going there too?
No, I'm saying that I didn't consider, at Hampton, we had our own bookstore across the street.
Exactly.
Every university, I did not factor that in.
Mm-hmm. Now, the HBCU bookstores have been taken over by most of them, these corporations, but the art gallery bookstores aren't in that chain. So I can see, right, because I was just up there last week, I can see the stack of these catalogs in the window of the bookstore at the art gallery on the second floor of Benjamin Trevor Arnett, and it's probably not online. So you might just have to call. You know what I'm saying? But some of the small, like Talladega, I had to call Talladega to track this down. Tuskegee's bookstore is also very excellent. Some of the bookstores at the college campuses, that's where you want to get like your stuff. But the kids are now Etsy and everything. And people are leaving now. We'll be here all day on this. I mean, but I do want to mention this. Dr. Reba Kelsey, who's at Morehouse School of Medicine, said, Dr. James Lipscomb, the family physician who influenced my decision to shift from dentistry to medicine as a career, went to Talladega. He made his transition on the 24th, and his ritual was yesterday. Ashe. So I want to mention that. That's how we come to get, like, we going to be all right, y'all. We just got to remember that's all. So I want to raise that for Dr. Lipscomb. So anyway, love you.
Love you.
Yes, love you. And we will talk.
All right. Bye, y'all. Have a blessed day.